The formation of the Empire at the end of the devastating galaxy-wide Clone Wars ended the Republic that had stood for thousands of years. The new regime claimed to herald a new era of order and peace within the galaxy, but many within the near-defunct Senate saw it for what it truly was and were already plotting its demise. However, the Galactic Civil War was about to begin, bringing hope to everyone willing to fight against the evil of the Empire. These long videos are difficult and time-consuming to make, so please consider liking, sharing, and commenting. And if you ever wanted to come pretty close to meeting some hobbits in real life, check out our sponsor for this video, Fan Fusion Phoenix, the indie pop culture convention that's gathering real fans in Phoenix, Arizona, June 6th to 8th, 2025. We don't just mean meeting Hobbit cosplayers either, because Elijah Wood will be leading all 4 of the Lord of the Rings Hobbits as special guests. They'll be joined by Simon Pegg from Shaun of the Dead, Katie Seagal from Futurama, Charlie Cox from Daredevil, and the list goes on. It's also going to be overflowing with gaming, with live arcade cabinets to play, the game Tabletopia, an arena of tabletop action, as well as board games, card games, and D&D. It's not only family friendly with loads of games, art, and activities, but kids under 12 get in for free. And backed by popular demand, Fan Fusion Phoenix will feature a wrestling extravaganza of heroes and villains battling it out. You probably also noticed the cosplay. Yep, there'll be cosplay, suffice to say, bring your own too. You can get all the details and see all the scheduled action by heading to phoenixfanfusion.com, link in the description. As Chancellor Sheev Palpatine was gathering new powers throughout the Clone War, several senators grew worried at this alarming rate of centralization of authority. Despite their attempts to combat this, their fears would be realized in 19 BBY, when he declared himself Emperor of the new Galactic Empire. Not long after this, their party suffered again with the loss of their leader, Padme Amidala of Naboo, publicly announced as a casualty of the Jedi Rebellion against Palpatine. The truth of her fate was known to those of her inner circle, namely Senators Bail Organa of Alderaan and Mon Mothma of Chandrila, who would act as the new leaders of the faction and serve as the most persistent and most threatening challenge to Palpatine's reign. In its early years, the Empire put a lot of effort into organizing various planets into new systems. They would start by building military installations and educational facilities, such as the ones on Mandalore and Lothal, bringing the planetary systems closer to Imperial authority through a slow brainwashing process. But the real power and will of the Empire would be shown when the more unrestful worlds would protest, leading to severe, near-crippling sanctions. Those that would rebel were treated with no mercy, as an example to those who would try to resist Imperial authority. Mon Cala was nearly eradicated in 18 BBY, and Ryloth's freedom fighters, led by Sham Syndulla, were decimated by the Emperor and his enforcer Darth Vader in 14 BBY. This form of dominance and stabilization was called the Tarkin Doctrine, after one of the closest advisors of the Emperor, Wilhuff Tarkin, and it entailed rule through power and fear. Those planets that were loyal would be transformed into model worlds, and those who even thought of doing anything else would be brutally suppressed. This doctrine led to rapid militarization, and the Empire became a military dictatorship with a strong human elite that brutalized alien populations by either eradicating them or strip mining their planets and leaving them to their fate. Even relatively affluent human populations were not immune to the Empire as it exercised its newfound power, testing its limits. The planet Ghorman, with a human population very near to the core, experienced one of the earliest examples of Imperial power, quashing unrest when a crowd of protesters attempted to block Tarkin from accessing a landing pad in the capital city, Palmo. Tarkin decided to then land on the protesters, killing hundreds. The senators still held a certain amount of power, as the Emperor needed them to keep their planets from open rebellion until his secret Operation Stardust was ready. As a result, Bail Organa and Mon Mothma would use their influence to help the worlds that bore the ire of the Empire. As time wore on, they switched to other covert means, mainly contacting the various rebel groups across the Empire, such as Saw Gerrera's cell, and various other underground movements that oppose Palpatine. They would be supplied with weapons, food, and other logistical needs, as well as information from Imperial defectors and independent intelligence networks such as Fulcrum, which was founded by Bail Organa and former Jedi Ahsoka Tano in 18 BBY. This was a group of agents from various backgrounds in and outside of the Imperial military, and they were vital to the success of these early anti-Empire movements. Two of the other key figures in the early formation of these rebel movements were a man named Luthen Rael and his assistant Clea Markey. Luthen Rael was originally Sergeant Lear of the Imperial Army, but he deserted soon after the declaration of the Empire, disgusted and traumatized by the atrocities he was committing in the Empire's name. The final tipping point for him came when his forces were responsible for the massacre of Clea Markey's people on her unknown homeworld. Lear discovered Clea hiding on his ship and fled the planet with the orphaned girl. From there, the pair, posing as father and daughter, devoted themselves to fighting the Empire, executing attacks on Imperial assets on worlds like Naboo. They also coordinated efforts between disparate groups of rebel cells and operatives, ranging from Saw Gerrera's militants to disaffected senators like Mon Mothma. Luthen managed most of these activities from his store, an antique shop on Coruscant, which provided him with direct access to some of the galaxy's wealthiest and most powerful individuals. His reach even extended into the Imperial Security Bureau, where he secured the cooperation of a promising young agent named Lonnie Jung. Rael's activities did not escape the notice of the ISB, who knew him only as Axis, but his and Clea's efforts would prove key to organizing an effective resistance to the Empire. One of the biggest assets in Rael's repertoire came from an unexpected source in 5 BBY. A man on the planet Ferrix named Cassian Andor had managed to steal an Imperial Starpath unit from the naval base on Steergard, drawing Luthen's attention. Luthen travelled to Ferrix under the pretense of buying the Starpath unit, but in reality his hope was to recruit Andor, employing him in the fight against the Empire. During their meeting, the pair was unexpectedly attacked by security forces of the Preox Molana Corporate Zone. Days earlier, Andor had been on the planet Molana 1, trying to track his long-lost sister, when he was accosted by Primor Corpos, both of whom he killed. As a result, Cyril Khan had put together a task force hoping to arrest Andor, now, unbeknownst to him, catching one of the most effective anti-Imperial leaders in the crossfire. Andor and Rael were able to escape with the assistance of others on Ferrix, heading on Luthen's ship to the planet Aldhani. Once safely on Aldhani, Rael successfully convinced Andor to take the job he'd been attempting to hire him for on Ferrix. Rael had assembled a team under the leadership of Velsatha, who also happened to be Mon Mothma's cousin, with the goal of raiding the Imperial base in the Aldhani Dam, where payroll for the entire sector was held. If successful, this would give the rebel forces a much-needed influx of credits, while also demonstrating to the galaxy that the Empire was not untouchable. On top of Satha and Andor, who joined the team under the name Clem, the team included Imperial Lieutenant Ghorman, who supplied the group with intel from within the base, Cinta Kaz, Taramin Bakona, and Karis Nemik. Nemik was an ideologue, and his manifesto would prove to be very popular with the rebels, converting many disaffected Imperial citizens to their cause. The infiltration occurred during a local festival, which coincided with a stunning aurora phenomenon known as the Eye of Aldhani. In the local tongue, it was the Makani Bre Dani. The Imperial occupation had been slowly crushing the indigenous beings of the planet, reducing attendance of the annual pilgrimage year after year as their culture was destroyed. 4 of the team posed as a guard detail for Commandant Jayhold Behaz, while Cinta and Satha entered the dam from underwater. Kaz held Behaz's family hostage, while the rest of the team took Behaz himself to the vault, racing to liberate the credits before assistance could come from the nearby Alkanzi airbase, alerted by the sudden loss of communications caused by a scrambling charge placed by Satha and Kaz. One of the base's own technicians was then able to successfully slice into the strike team's communications, sending a security force to the vault to confront them. Ghorman attempted to force Behaz to order them away, claiming it was not an assault but a top-secret official mission. Instead, Behaz died, exhausted from being forced to assist in loading the credits onto the base's box freighter, which Andor and the team planned to use in their escape. His death made the situation erupt into a firefight, quickly claiming the life of Ghorman, while Andor tried to prepare the freighter for launch. The fighting also claimed the life of Bakona. Kaz remained on the base, slipping away in an Imperial uniform, while the rest of the surviving members escaped on the box freighter. TIE fighters from Malkenzi arrived, forcing Andor to quickly maneuver to avoid being shot down. This caused a cart of credits to pin Nemik against the wall, critically injuring him. The group, having a contingency plan for just such a medical emergency, headed for Dr. Quadpaw on the nearby moon of Fresno. Quadpaw was unfortunately unable to save Nemik, who, as his last action, entrusted his political manifesto to Andor. Skeen attempted to convince Andor to betray Satha and split all of the credits, causing Andor to shoot him. He then took the fee he was promised by Rael, 200,000 credits, and made his way home to Ferrix. This would prove to be a risky place to be. While Andor was on Aldhani, the Empire had taken over the holdings of the Preox Molana Corporation in response to Cyril Khan's failed assault on Ferrix, which was one of the planets within their free trade zone. The Imperial headquarters on Ferrix was established in a building on Rix Road, in the middle of Ferrix City, and placed under the command of Captain Vanis Tigo. Once home, Andor gave part of his earnings to a friend named Bix Khaleen to pay off his various debts, and tried to convince his adopted mother, Maarva, to bring their droid B2EMO to leave Ferrix with him. Maarva, a prominent leader in a local social club called the Daughters of Ferrix, had become inspired to fight the Empire by the heist on Aldhani, like many around the galaxy. On Coruscant, Mon Mothma confronted Rael about the Aldhani heist, believing it would cause further crackdowns by the Empire. Luthen countered that the movement they were building needed credits, which she could no longer provide, and that the inspiration for further rebel actions would continue to expose the Empire's excesses and create fractures within it. Maarva's radicalization, then, was playing directly into Luthen's hopes. On other worlds, fledgling groups were similarly beginning to appear in opposition to the Empire. In some cases, this meant the radicalization of existing social clubs or networks, like the Daughters of Ferrix, but others, like the Ghorman Front on the planet Ghorman, which we briefly mentioned earlier, were being built from scratch. Andor departed the planet alone, heading to Niamos, where he hoped to live under an alias, Geef Kirgo, while the occupation of Ferrix continued to marshal its resources, cracking down on local unrest and arresting several locals. Many on Ferrix were upset with the loss of the hotel, which had been turned into the Imperial headquarters, and prevented trade with outworld visitors. The ISB placed an agent named Dedra Miro in charge of the occupation, and she became convinced that the earlier battle on Ferrix was not just random criminal activity, but part of a growing rebel network's activities, adding even more fuel to the search for Andor from all sides. While on Niamos, Andor was accosted by an Imperial shore trooper accused of anti-Imperial activity and sentenced to 6 years in prison, with no real opportunity to contest the charges thanks to the new Public Order Resentencing Directive, which was instituted in response to the Aldhani Heist. Little did the Empire or ISB know that they had one of the heist's participants in custody. He was sent to a prison installation in the Narkina system, where he spent several weeks laboring on an unknown Imperial project alongside his fellow inmates, the real purpose of the expanded incarceration of Imperial subjects. When an elderly prisoner named Ulaf died shortly before his sentence was complete, and another inmate who had theoretically completed his own sentence was readmitted on another floor, the inmates began to understand that they would never be free. Andor enlisted the help of other inmates, including Ruscott Melshi and the floor manager Kino Loy, who had previously been unwilling to tolerate inmate disobedience, believing it could jeopardize his own release, in an escape plan. Andor was able to cut power to the floor, which was electrified to prevent prisoner escape. With their entire working group on board, the prisoners began to stage a riot. Andor and Loy climbed within the facility to seize control of communications, announcing their intentions and inciting a full-blown revolt within the entire prison. Once fully in control, the inmates jumped from the prison into the oceans which surrounded it. Many likely perished during this escape, potentially including Loy, who was unable to swim, but Andor and Melshi made it out alive. Andor made contact with Ferrix from Niamos, where he had returned, learning from Sanwan, who ran a freight business on Ferrix, that Maarva had died. As he prepared to return home for Maarva's funeral, several groups were hoping to use the event to lure him in and capture him. Cyril Khan, formerly of Preox Molana, remained obsessed with finding Andor, holding him responsible for ruining his life. Vel Satha and Cintiq Kaz, who had worked with Andor on Aldhani, were also deployed to Ferrix by Luthen Rael in an attempt to neutralize him before he could reveal anything about Luthen and his network. The Daughters of Ferrix organization requested a traditional public funeral for the beloved local figure, which Dedra Miro and now Prefect Tigo granted, putting their forces on high alert for Andor's potential appearance,
and setting up an Imperial perimeter around the procession lines, particularly in front of the headquarters at the end of Rick's Road. As the funeral began, masses of the Ferrix citizenry joined the procession, despite restrictions placed on its size and location by the Imperials. Andor himself remained outside of it though. On top of attempting to remain hidden from the ISB and from Luthen, who he spotted wearing a cloak near the procession, he had learned that Bix Caleen had been taken prisoner by the Imperials. She was being tortured for information, and he put his efforts towards rescuing her. As the procession continued towards Fountain Square, Tigo ordered the troopers to get the marching Ferrixians off the streets. Acting on information provided by a local who detested Andor, Miro had deployed a squad of death troopers to find him, personally heading out of the containment zone around the hotel, against the advice of Tigo, who recommended simply surrounding the area. The crowd, facing increasing concentrations of Imperial troops, arranged themselves through the square around B2EMO, chanting Stone and Sky, as B2EMO projected Maarva's final message to her compatriots. In this message, Maarva decried the evils of the Empire, expressing a wish that she were around to fight them longer, and had begun fighting them earlier, hoping to inspire all present to fight the Empire. With this last pronunciation, Prefect Tigo covered the projector and kicked the droid over, erupting the crowd into action. Tigo was attacked by a local named Brasso, and the Imperial lines were charged by the locals. One, Wilman Pack, threw an improvised explosive device into the crowd, nearly killing Dedra Miro if not for the intervention of Cyril Khan, who had been watching from nearby. Imperial Army troopers and stormtroopers were ordered to fire at will on the riot, mowing down dozens, if not hundreds of Phyrexians as the battle continued. Cassian successfully rescued Caleen, sending her off in a shuttle alongside Brasso and Pack, while he returned to seek out Rael. After finding the man, who had become increasingly sought out himself by the ISB, and especially Miro, only under the title Axis, Andor demanded that Luthen either kill him or enlist him fully into the rebellion, beginning his career as one of the rebellion's most successful operatives, including an eventual stint with Organa and Tano's Fulcrum program. Ferrix was only one case study in the cycle of resistance and crackdowns growing throughout the galaxy, as the Empire sought to spread its power and particularly to claim resources.
The planet Lothal was among many in the Outer Rim that were colonized extensively by the Empire, and it was given special attention due to its deposits of dunium and kyber crystals, both of which were highly prized resources for the Empire's projects. This was compounded by Governor Arinda Price's actions. She sought to make Lothal a major player as the main Imperial base in the Outer Rim by having military and manufacturing installations all over the planet. However, the extensive military buildup, as well as the concentration of resources, would bring the attention of the still underground Rebel Alliance, namely the crew of the Ghost, known as the Spectres. The Spectres were a group of individuals who had all faced some form of injustice from the Empire. The leader of this group was Hera, daughter of the Ryloth insurgency leader Sham Syndulla. Hera was a highly skilled pilot, who owned the VCX-100 light freighter, named Ghost, and she left Ryloth, along with her C-110P droid, Chopper, after the failed assassination attempt on Palpatine and Darth Vader. In her opinion, Ryloth's only chance for liberation was through an allied galactic attempt. The second commander was former Jedi Padawan Caleb Dune, who escaped Palpatine's Jedi Purge under the alias Kanan Jarrus, and joined Hera after they cooperated against the Empire on Gorse in 11 BBY. The crew would soon be joined by a Lasat warrior known as Garazeb Aurelios, or Zeb, who was one of the few survivors of the Lasat genocide at the hands of the Empire. Another member of the crew, Sabine Wren, was a weapons expert from Mandalore, who left as a result of the Empire's subjugation of Mandalore. And the last member, Ezra Bridger, an orphan recruited from Lothal in 5 BBY after he helped the Spectres in a mission to steal weapons from the Imperials. It was discovered that he was Force sensitive, which prompted Kanan to take him as his apprentice. The Spectres ran most of their operations from the Lothal sector and quickly gained a reputation. Their wide range of operations, as well as the Jedi in their crew, led to them being hunted by many of the higher-ranking Imperials, namely Grand Moff Tarkin, who was in charge of the whole Outer Rim, and the Grand Inquisitor, a Force-sensitive Pau'an male who was dispatched by Darth Vader to purge the Jedi. This hunt resulted in the death of the Grand Inquisitor himself during the action at Mustafar, in which the Spectres rescued Kanan Jarrus, destroyed Tarkin's ship, the Sovereign, and escaped with the help of the Phoenix Squadron, which they then joined. The Empire now realized that these rebel activities were coordinated and were far larger in scope than previously thought. With the deaths of several more Inquisitors and Darth Vader's failure to capture them, the Empire's eyes were now fixed on the Lothal rebels, and the 7th Fleet was sent to the sector at the request of Governor Pryce. It was led by a newly appointed commander, arguably the best tactician in the Empire, Grand Admiral Thrawn. Analyzing different encounters against the rebels throughout the sector, Thrawn concluded that Phoenix Squadron played a role in most of them, which meant that it was a far bigger threat. He provided examples to Tarkin, Admiral Constantine, and Governor Pryce during his briefing. When asked about his plan, he responded with, "I will start my operations here and pull the rebels apart piece by piece. They will be the architects of their own destruction." After his arrival in 2 BBY, he started planning the operation by letting the rebels continue their activities, offering moderate resistance, as this allowed him to study the enemy. He knew that the capture of the Spectres, or any other small part of the Phoenix Cell, would not be enough to end the rebellion, so he bided his time. During this time, Mon Mothma became disillusioned with the Senate, as the growing number of Imperial atrocities and wrongdoings were left unanswered.
This disillusionment had been slowly occurring over a long time, as we know she had been involved with at least some of the funding of overt rebel activity for years in cooperation with Luthen Rael, and her association with Bail Organa and even Saw Gerrera in opposing the Empire stretched back essentially to the Empire's formation. But to understand her final break with the Empire, we must jump back slightly once again to discuss the planet Ghorman. Ghorman had remained in the galactic political consciousness ever since the initial Ghorman massacre described earlier. By 5 BBY, the Senate was still debating what Mon Mothma termed blatant domination of a faithful ally, but the following year, Ghorman would become the subject of increased Imperial scrutiny. Local dissent had grown for years, leading to the formation of opposition groups like the Ghorman Front opposing the Empire, and the initial Ghorman massacre was commemorated by a monument in the capital city of Palmo's Plaza, called the Monument to the Fallen. But while this dissent did influence the Imperial response somewhat, it was something else entirely which drew the Empire's focus. Ghorman was largely isolationist, but it was also known as a center of fashion thanks to a type of spider called the Galactipod, which produced fine silks used in textile production. The export of these silks provided a significant amount of wealth for the planet, despite otherwise not closely associating with the galactic community. But more of interest to the Empire, Ghorman was discovered to be home to large deposits of a mineral called calcite, which was incredibly rare and used for reactor lens coating. Imperial Director Orson Krennic explained this to a meeting of various Imperial leaders in the Mathline Divide, describing it as crucial to an energy initiative being run by the Empire. In reality, the massive amounts of reactor coating calcite were needed for a secret project known as Project Stardust, which we'll return to later. Other alternatives, substitutes, and even synthetic means of calcite production had been explored, but the end analysis had concluded that only Ghorman's calcite reserves were sufficient for the Empire's needs. To this end, a plan was needed to place Ghorman under strict Imperial control to extract the mineral, something which would surely devastate the planet's ecosystem, and at the very least displace its inhabitants. Krennic placed ISB agent Dedra Meero, who had overseen the operations on Ferrix, in charge of the initiative on Ghorman, leaving it to her to work out a means to allow the Empire to essentially destroy the planet for their purposes, given that the mining had a significant risk of destabilizing the planet's core. Meero, who was obsessed with tracking down rebel activity, particularly that of a shadowy figure referred to as Axis, devised a plan with her supervisor, Major Leo Partagaz, to foment insurrection on the world. The planet's isolation in the galactic community would also prove to be a massive asset in the Empire's ability to shape the narrative around their occupation, and their increasingly brutal response to the insurrectionist movement they planned to stoke. While Meero and Partagaz began working out their plans for Ghorman, Cassian Andor was engaged in a mission for Luthen Rael and the growing rebellion to steal a powerful TIE variant, the TIE Avenger. However, when he reached the rendezvous point on the unassuming planet of Yavin 4 to transfer the fighter, he learned that his contact had been killed by a local rebel band, the Maya Pei Brigade, and Andor himself was captured under suspicion of being an Imperial pilot. After several days in captivity, Andor was able to take advantage of infighting within the brigade to escape, contacting Luthen's assistant Clea Markey to request a new drop-off point. When Markey informed Andor that his usual hideout on Mina Rau, where he and other escaped Ferrixians had been working as farmhands, had fallen under a communication blackout, he quickly headed for the planet. Once there, he found his companions in conflict with Imperial search parties, cracking down on illegal immigrant labour. He was able to escape with Bix and Wilman Pack, however Brasso was killed in the escape attempt. Over the next year, heading into 3BBY, Cassian and Bix continued to work for Luthen, while Miro and Partagaz executed the early stages of their plan. Miro had been in a relationship with Cyril Khan since sometime after the events on Ferrix, and she had arranged for his transfer within his new employment at the Bureau of Standards to the head office for the department on Ghorman, where Khan worked to ingratiate himself to the local resistance groups, like the Ghorman Front. During conversations with his mother back on Coruscant, which he knew were being monitored by Ghorman Front members, he expressed disbelief in some of the Empire's growing narratives about the threat posed by Ghorman. While Khan was heading home that night, past a small peaceful protest, he was given a model of a Ghorman spider, which was being used by the front to pass information about underground town hall meetings to organize resistance. Khan conferred with Miro to update her on both his surveillance and his invitation to the meeting, with Miro confirming that he should attend, though Khan remained unaware of just how far Miro and the ISB intended to take the occupation beyond simple pacification of dissidents. At the meeting, several Ghorman expressed their grievances with the Empire, with Khan claiming to sympathize and admire their passion when asked. Some present were concerned about his loyalties, knowing he was an off-worlder who worked within the Imperial government. The meeting also focused on the Empire's construction of a new facility on the planet. Many believed the Empire was building a fortress on Ghorman, while another element of the complaint concerned the original Ghorman massacre. The Empire had promised their new structure would not occlude or cast shadow on the memorial for those killed nearly 15 years before, but this promise had already been broken. After the meeting, the Ghor, including the Ghorman Front leader, Caro Relance, continued to talk to Khan, imploring him to use his position within the Empire to raise their concerns, and believing that he would act as an ally to make their voice be heard peacefully. Meanwhile, on Coruscant, it was clear to Luthen Rael that the situation on Ghorman was going to continue to escalate. He asked Andor to go to Ghorman and evaluate Relance and the Ghorman Front, thinking that if the Ghorman Front can pose a real threat to the Empire on the planet, or at least prompt another example of Imperial overreach, its location as an affluent world near the core would force the galaxy to take notice. As Andor arrived on Ghorman under the guise of fashion designer Varian Sky, the ISB, under Attendant Grimish, conducted a raid on Khan's office at the Bureau of Standards, uncovering the Ghorman Front's listening device that Khan had informed Miro of. His faked outrage over the ISB's overreach only served to ingratiate him further into the Ghorman Front, who informed him that they wanted his help in getting the schematics of the new Imperial facility and to execute a heist on Imperial transports to gain weaponry. He agreed to help and returned to Coruscant, where he met with Miro and Partagaz, informing them of the Front's activities and goal, and securing their cooperation in providing transport schedules which Khan, faking cooperation with the Front, could use to execute their heist for the schematics and continue to build justification for the Imperial crackdown on Ghorman. Despite this close cooperation with the ISB, Khan continued to believe that his role was to catch outside agitators in order to eventually de-escalate the situation. Andor's ongoing assessment of the front was less than favourable, exposing multiple security vulnerabilities, an assessment supported, as we know, by their infiltration by Khan, and the group's general inexperience and lack of capacity to sustain an armed rebellion without being wiped out. Andor tried to convince Luthen that the front was not ready, but Luthen was too enamoured by the potential for a Ghorman victory, or more likely, crackdown, to incite further unrest in the galaxy. This led to a break between Luthen and Andor, who, over the next year, left Luthen's organization to join the more centralized rebel effort being organized on the planet Yavin. Still hoping to assist the Ghorman Front, Rael dispatched Kaz and Sartha to assist them in their heist. Initially, the heist went according to plan. One of the transports was disabled at the front, assisted by Sather and Kaz, with Khan watching from afar and reporting to Miro and Partagaz unbeknownst to the front. Unfortunately, a bystander named Lazine, who had been very vocal about the Imperial occupation at the earlier town hall, refused to leave the vicinity of the heist when one of the front members named Sam instructed him to. His refusal to leave prompted Sam to level his blaster at Lazine, which escalated the situation even further. Lazine assaulted Sam, causing Sam to accidentally fire his blaster, hitting and killing Kaz. Khan reported shots being fired to the ISB, and Partagaz ordered reinforcements to the scene, further escalating the Imperial presence on the planet, and giving further ammunition to the Imperials to propagandize against the Ghorman insurrectionists. The next year saw a continued escalation of Imperial response to supposed terrorist activity on the planet. In 2BBY, Miro was operating directly from the planet, and Partagaz informed her that with no substitute yet found for Calcite, the Empire needed its final excuse to begin relocation of the citizens of Ghorman and full Imperial takeover of the planet under the orders of Director Krennic, with little of the planet expected to remain following the mining. A firebombing was alleged to have been carried out at the Palmo Naval Terminal, which independent analysis suggests was likely to have been staged by the ISB, beginning the final phase of the Ghorman plan, with hopes to finish it in the following 48 hours. The newly arrived crisis specialist of the ISB, Captain Kaido, escalated the oppression of the locals through the institution of new curfews. Knowing Miro had been deployed to Ghorman, Luthen Rael sent Wilman Pack to Yavin, hoping to re-enlist Andor in an attempt to assassinate Miro. Initially, Andor was hesitant, still distasteful about Rael's methods, but ultimately he agreed to help, taking a U-wing with Pack to Ghorman, much to the chagrin of General Draven, who ran the Yavin base, and informed Andor that this kind of unauthorized departure for personal missions would not be tolerated in the future if the rebellion hoped to succeed. Once arrived, Pack and Andor scouted the Imperial office building next to Palmo Plaza, where the Empire had established their office. Miro faced additional problems on Ghorman itself, beyond the newly arrived rebel assassins. Cyril Khan had begun to grow suspicious of the work he was being asked to do, and the Imperial narratives around the attacks. He had been under the impression that he was supposed to be responsible for finding the outside agitators responsible for prodding Ghorman dissidents into action, but he was being kept away from information necessary for him to do that, and he had begun to suspect there were elements of the Imperial plan that he was not being informed about thanks to information from the local resistance groups. Those same groups, especially the Front, were facing a crisis themselves in deciding how to proceed. The planet was under increasing occupation, especially around Palmo Plaza, and there was dissent between those who believed in peaceful resistance versus those who believed they needed to be more proactive. The day following Andor and Pack's arrival, the pair planned to go forward with their assassination attempt. While they were setting up, Imperial forces were also moving barricades. The Ghorman front believed they may have been clearing the barricades out, but Andor informed them that the office building was being turned into a fortress. The Empire had already begun to land mining rigs by this point, to the dismay of Miro, who thought it might undermine attempts to paint the Ghor as the aggressors. News had already been spreading throughout the galaxy of a protest and general strike on Ghorman, centralized on Palmo Plaza, where armed Ghorman front members were beginning to assemble. Many of the Ghor were aware of the landing mining equipment, and when pressed by one of them on what the Empire might want on the planet, Khan once again moved to confront Miro as the growing protest began to sing the Ghorman anthem. Miro denied knowledge of the mining equipment when asked, and he attacked her, forcing her to reveal part of the Empire's interest in Ghorman minerals, to the shock of Khan, who departed back to the crowd in disbelief. As the protest grew, Imperial Sergeant Bloy set more soldiers against the crowd, which began harassing the soldiers when the final phase of the Imperial plan was triggered. A sniper stationed outside the protest fired upon the army troopers, many of whom were young and inexperienced, with little discipline. In response to what they believed was an attack from within the ranks of the protesters, the Imperial troops began to fire upon all of the protesters, who began to panic and flee, while armed members of the front returned fire. Powerful Imperial KX enforcer droids were also deployed, brutally batting aside protesters as they made their way through the crowd. Looking to finish his mission in the midst of the ongoing riot now spreading throughout the city, Andor remained in the plaza, attempting to line up a shot on Miro. Seeing him with his blaster aimed at the office building, Cyril Khan attacked Andor, the man who Khan held responsible for ruining his life nearly 4 years earlier. Andor was saved by the intervention of some of the surviving front members, specifically Rylance, who had traditionally been one of the voices advocating peaceful resistance, and who had taken Khan under his wing during his time posing as a front member. With their opportunity to assassinate Miro gone, Andor and Pack joined the Ghor, now retreating from the plaza. On their way out, they managed to disable and capture one of the KX droids, designated K-2SO. Pack temporarily remained behind on Ghorman to help broadcast the story of the Imperial crackdown and the hundreds of dead Ghor, while Andor returned to Coruscant to meet with Rael and Markey. This second Ghorman massacre represented a political turning point for the Galactic Civil War. Mon Mothma and Bail Organa discussed their political options, deciding that it was time for someone to speak out against the Emperor, but that Yavin was not yet fully ready for both to depart the Senate. Mon Mothma began planning a series of speeches, the first of which she planned to give directly in the Senate. Originally, Mothma had planned to flee the Senate under the protection of Bail Organa's staff. However, Rael warned her that his staff had been compromised, saying instead that he would send her an escort in the form of Andor. Andor urged Luthen to join Mothma in her escape after the speech, but he insisted his work was not yet done. During her speech, Mon Mothma described the atrocities of Ghorman as only the beginning, and Palpatine as the monster who would come for the... Andor then began escorting her out of the Senate rotunda, but the pair were confronted by ISB agents intending to arrest Mon Mothma. Mon Mothma's assistant, Simaj, accused the ISB agent of being a rebel spy as she attempted to arrest Mon Mothma, giving Andor the opportunity to shoot her and flee with the senator before a more organized response could be arranged. Simaj continued to cover their escape, and the trio later met back up at a safe house formerly used by Andor and Bix Kalin while working for Luthen. From there, Mon Mothma made her way to the Ghost and Captain Syndulla's forces.
Thrawn deduced it was Mon Mothma that she was escorting, and sent Admiral Constantine and Governor Price to intercept them at the Archeon Nebula, but they failed to do so. Upon her arrival at Dantooine, Mon Mothma gave a speech denouncing the Empire and calling for all the individual rebel cells to unite and fight to liberate the galaxy, promising that she would be on the front lines with them. With this, the Rebel Alliance was truly formed. As this was going on, Thrawn was getting closer and closer to locating Phoenix Base. Rebel forces had concentrated in the Atollon system for their first operation of the war. They decided on an attack on Lothal as their previous successes and steadily growing strength, along with the arrival of the Massassi group under General Dodonna, had emboldened them. Their plan, ultimately, would involve an unexpected strike upon Lothal, coordinated with the local resistance, where they would use the planetary shields and weapons against the 7th Fleet before it had time to react. The impending attack was discovered by Thrawn's agents as they tracked the Massassi group through the system. Thrawn intentionally leaked the information to Alexander Kallus, an agent of the Imperial Security Bureau, who was secretly part of the rebel Fulcrum network. Kallus tried to inform the Phoenix Cell, but his transmission was intercepted, allowing the Empire to finally discover the rebel base. The rebels only received half of the message, but it was quickly deduced by Captain Syndulla that Thrawn knew their location. She called for an immediate evacuation, but as this order was issued, the 7th Fleet arrived and blockaded their escape, as well as jamming all transmissions in or out of the system. The rebel main ships amassed in Atollon's atmosphere were 3 Bahatok gunships, 7 CR-90 corvettes, 3 Nebulon B frigates, one of them being General Dodonna's Vanguard, 2 GR-75 transport ships, 3 Hammerhead corvettes, and Commander Sato's Quasar cruiser Phoenix Nest. These were outclassed by the 5 Imperial-class Star Destroyers, 2 Argeton light cruisers, and 2 interdictors of the 7th Fleet, with Admiral Constantine commanding his interdictor on the right flank. Thrawn arrived shortly after on another Imperial-class Star Destroyer, his flagship Chimera, placing it behind the Imperial center. General Dodonna urged an immediate jump to hyperspace, but Commander Sato decided to stay behind with the Phoenix Squadron till the ground forces were fully evacuated, planning to cover the retreat of the Massassi group. The first ship to jump a Nebulon B frigate, was pulled out of hyperspace and destroyed by Admiral Constantine, and that's when the rebels discovered the two interdictors on either flank, both of which created gravity wells stopping any and all hyperspace movements. Hera realized that there would be no escape from this fight, and proposed a diversionary attack so that a fighter could leave the Atollon system and contact the rebel command on Yavin 4 for reinforcements that might help the fleet escape the system. Ezra Bridger was tasked with this role, and took command of the Night Brother. He was to be escorted by Hera's squadron through the opening that the fleet would create. Commander Sato deployed the fleet into a spearhead formation, and sent the Y-Wings to bomb the Imperial flanks and goad them into attacking. This move was anticipated by Thrawn, who countered it by maintaining his position while strengthening his center and sending his fighters so that the rebels had to attack him. Hera then moved her squadron to try and get through the enemy formation, covered by allied squadrons, but they were repulsed. The Imperial bombers then took out a great portion of the rebel right flank, and these losses, along with the advance of Thrawn's two light cruisers, checked Hera's progress, forcing her to return to the center to reinforce it. As more and more of the fleet was destroyed in the desperate attack, Commander Sato ordered an evacuation of the Phoenix Nest and had the ship piloted in a way suggesting he was trying to escape. This maneuver was successful, as Constantine took the bait in an attempt to be the one to down the rebellion's flagship. At the last moment, Sato changed course and crashed directly into Constantine's vessel, destroying both ships, and this gave Ezra the chance to jump to hyperspace. With that, Thrawn ordered the last interdictor to move to the center and made a general advance, which forced the few remaining rebel ships that weren't destroyed to the ground on Atollon. After conducting an orbital bombardment on the shields, he sent his ground forces to capture the high-profile targets, but the rebels fought for long enough to allow Ezra to return with reinforcements from the allied warlike Mandalorian clan Wren. Mon Mothma had denied help, as she did not want to expose the full rebellion prematurely. Clan Wren would prove up to the task, however, and disabled the last interdictor, allowing what remained of the rebel forces to escape to Yavin 4. The rebels lost most of their ships and 80% of their troops, but the majority of the rebel alliance survived to fight another day, thanks to Mon Mothma's conservative tactics. Meanwhile, Thrawn thought he had crippled the rebellion, and that gave the rebel alliance much needed time to recuperate their losses. It returned to their usual covert operations, finding great success in undermining Thrawn's attempts on Mandalore and Geonosis, but it wasn't until late in 1 BBY that they would once again gather enough forces to resume operations on Lothal. Soon they discovered that Thrawn was working on the TIE Defender program, which could have given the Empire's single-pilot starfighters a decisive advantage against the rebel ships. The Rebel Alliance sent the Spectres, who once again managed to pass Thrawn's blockade and steal a prototype, destroying the airfield in the process. The Spectres were downed when they attempted to escape, but Syndulla managed to escape, bringing the TIE Defender plans to Yavin 4, where Dodonna's team studied the new starfighter. They found no weaknesses, which meant that the rebels had to act fast. Not long after, the Empire activated Protocol 13 for Lothal. This protocol would start an immediate evacuation of the Imperial personnel from the planet, followed by probable devastation of Lothal from orbit. The enactment of the protocol sprang the rebels into action, as they once again decided to attack Lothal, this time under the leadership of the newly promoted General Syndulla. The plan was to attack and destroy the fuel depot, therefore neutralizing not only the fleet's source of fuel, but also the fuel required for all operations on Lothal. This would be a coordinated attack, with Hera commanding a squadron of 24 bombers and fighters, which would breach Thrawn's blockade, while the rest of the Spectres still on Lothal would destroy the air defenses around the city, allowing Hera's squadron to destroy the depot, rendezvous with the Spectres, and leave the planet. The plan went as scheduled, with Hera arriving and taking out the Imperial fighters and their commander within orbit, incurring few losses of her own. At the same time, the Spectres infiltrated the city and destroyed the land defences, clearing the way for Hera. But as they passed through the atmosphere, they were assaulted by a hidden line of amassed TIE fighters, which Thrawn had placed there, knowing Hera could easily outmaneuver his Star Destroyers. This all but destroyed her squadron, with the few survivors, including herself, being captured. Thrawn was now confident that he had neutralized the rebels enough to depart for Coruscant. The Grand Admiral was unhappy that the Emperor was allocating funds to the top-secret Operation Stardust rather than his program, and hoped to change his master's mind. He left with his flagship, leaving the rest of the fleet under the command of Governor Pryce and his special agent Rook in command. Not long after, the Spectres attempted to free Hera. This succeeded, but they lost Commander Kanan in the process, as he sacrificed himself so they could escape. This was a Pyrrhic victory for Governor Pryce, as she inadvertently destroyed the fuel depot. She tried to cover this up with a victory parade and briefing Thrawn of Kanan's death via hologram. But Thrawn knew of the fuel depot's destruction due to her actions and promised severe repercussions upon his return. The Spectres, meanwhile, would not sit idly. While Kanan's loss was a severe blow for them, the absence of Thrawn gave them the opportunity to liberate Lothal, and so Hera left the planet to gather forces for the operation, which was unauthorized by the Rebel Alliance leadership. At this point, the leader of the Lothal rebels, Ryder Azadi, offered Governor Pryce to give up the Lothal rebels and the Spectres in exchange for immunity. This offer was seen as a golden opportunity by Pryce to amend her failure, but in reality it was a trap set by Ezra. When the governor personally led a large contingent to take the rebels into custody, her contingent was attacked and destroyed by the Force-sensitive Loth Wolves, who allied with Ezra. Hera's arrival with reinforcements resulted in her capture. The rebels then quickly made for the city and infiltrated the Imperial Dome with the aid of the captured Pryce. They were able to take full control of it with the intention of launching it out of the city before it could self-detonate. As they were about to launch it, however, Thrawn arrived at the scene and took command of the Chimera. His agent Rook disabled the planetary shield generators, and the city was bombarded, leading to many civilian casualties. The Grand Admiral convinced Ezra to surrender himself, promising that he would stop the bombardment. However, the young Jedi foresaw this, and not long after being brought onto the Chimera, he played his last card. As was planned, the rebels called upon a large pod of Purrgil, massive whale-like creatures that lived in deep space, traveling from star system to star system. The creatures attacked the 7th Fleet, all but destroying it. The details are lost, but both the Jedi and Grand Admiral were taken into deep space by the Purrgil, who had the ability to travel using hyperspace. With the destruction of the Imperial fleet, the rebels launched the Dome, killing Governor Pryce and destroying the last remaining presence of the Empire on Lothal in the process. The liberation of Lothal would be the first decisive victory of the Rebel Alliance, and Lothal would become the first planet to have thrown off its Imperial yoke, demonstrating to the entire galaxy that the Empire could be defeated. They expected the inevitable Imperial response, but it would never come, as other problems were brewing on the horizon, threatening to shake the foundations of the Empire to its very core. Following their victory on Lothal, the Rebel Alliance hesitated, not sure what to do next, as the liberation of Lothal hadn't even been a priority, nor authorized by the High Council or commanding officers. The success of the Spectres laid the seeds of doubt among the soldiers of the Alliance, who were now apprehensive of Mon Mothma's continued insistence on finding a diplomatic solution, as well as other leaders' push for covert means and avoiding direct action. This led many of the common soldiers to defect to other branches of the rebellion, which had broken off with the Rebel Alliance. Among them was the group of Saw Gerrera, who had become known for his brutal and successful hit-and-run tactics, and was considered a dangerous terrorist by the Empire. Their divisions and quarrelling would soon come to an end, however, as the Empire was about to finish its weapons program, codenamed Project Stardust, the Emperor's long-kept secret that was to give him complete domination of the galaxy. Let us step back to 23 BBY and the history behind the weapon. Project Stardust was a plan to build a colossally large battle station with the capability of destroying planets through a laser device powered by the energy of kyber crystals, which had long been used by the Jedi and Sith to power their lightsabers, and by this time was a new technology being pioneered in other uses. The project stemmed from early Sith plans, but truly found its roots during the lead-up to the Clone Wars, with the original plans coming from the Geonosian weaponsmith's Ultimate Weapon project. These plans were given to Count Dooku for safekeeping, and he passed them to Chancellor Sheev Palpatine, who was the Sith Lord Sidious in disguise. Palpatine shared them with the Republic Special Weapons Group, and convinced them to build it using the rumor that the Separatists were building their own super battle station. The project was to be kept under the utmost secrecy, and the truth would only be known to a select few, such as the future Grand Vizier Mas Amedda and the director of the Imperial Military Department of Advanced Weapons Research, Orson Krennic, with the latter in charge of the project. During and after the Clone Wars, resources were diverted to the project by hidden means, using scientists to work on projects, such as scientist Galen Erso's Project Celestial Power, which had a pretext of researching sustainable energy. Resources from random mining operations were then channeled into the work, which was hidden near Geonosis. But despite the personal interest of Palpatine in the project, it took a long time to complete, as the need for secrecy put a strain on the available resources. This was compounded upon with the raids made by partisans on the lightly defended convoys, the Geonosian worker revolts, the covert operations of the then hidden Rebel Alliance, and more crucially, the work of the Kyber power system being stalled, as Galen and his family fled into hiding in 17 BBY after discovering the truth of their involvement with the help of Saw Gerrera. Krennic was very persuasive in keeping the worries of his superiors in check and his critics, namely Grand Moff Wilhuff Tarkin, who considered the project as a drain on resources. Despite this opposition, Krennic was able to make good progress, especially after the capture of Galen Erso on Lamu in 15 BBY. Although the Kyber crystal power problem was solved and the work resumed, his belief that he had broken Galen would be Krennic's undoing.
The first hints of an Imperial superweapon came from information given to Luthen Rael, who was still on Coruscant, by his longtime informant in the ISB, Lonnie Jung. The latter had been spying on ISB agent Dedra Meero's files, and she had been doing her own investigations into what the Empire had been doing with Project Stardust. Jung informed Rael that the Energy Project and the Public Order Resentencing Directive under which Andor was imprisoned were simply a means to cover for the gathering of resources and labor to make what we now know as the Death Star. Despite promising he would extract Jung and his family to Yavin, Rael killed Jung once he had this information and began plans to evacuate Coruscant with Kleya, planning to turn the information he had gained over to Markey. While Luthen was preparing to leave, he was cornered in his shop by Meero and the ISB, who finally tracked him down as their long-sought mysterious Axis figure. Rather than allowing himself to be taken into custody, he attempted to take his own life, but an Imperial medical team was able to take him to Lina So Hospital, where he was kept on life support, as the Imperials hoped to interrogate him. Markey was able, however, to infiltrate the hospital where he was being kept barely alive, removing him from life support before he could divulge anything, sparing him the torment of Imperial interrogation. She headed to the safe house previously used by Andor and Mon Mothma and put out a call for aid. This final failure would also mark the end of Meero's career. She was arrested and confronted by Krennic for her role in not just the failure to apprehend Luthen alive, but also her role in collecting information on Stardust, which allowed a single source to be able to leak a significant amount of information on the subject. Following her own interrogation, she was sent to a prison complex, much like the one Andor had escaped from. She had been able to impart one useful bit of information, that Rael had an assistant, Kleya. On Yavin, Park received the distress call put out by Kleya, dispatching Andor, the rebuilt K2SO, and Ruskot Melshi, who had joined the rebellion on Yavin after escaping Narkina with Andor. This unauthorized mission once again irked the Yavin leadership, which now actively included both Senators Mothma and Organa, along with Admiral Raddus of the Mon Calamari, among others. Once they had made it to the safe house, Claire informed the rescue team of the information given to her by Rael about the Imperial superweapon. Claire insisted Andor take the information to Yavin and leave her, given the tense relationship between Luthen and the Yavin leadership in the past, but Andor refused to leave her behind. She was knocked out in the ensuing fight with the Imperial troops sent to apprehend her, but Andor, Melshi and K2 successfully extracted her to Yavin. Initially, the leadership was hesitant to accept her information, given it had come through Luthen, but Andor convinced them to listen to her. Soon, this information was to be supplemented from another source within the Empire, though it would require cooperation with another rebel leader, with whom the Yavin rebels had a tumultuous past, Saw Gerrera.
Project Stardust was entering its final phase by the time Lothal was liberated, and Tarkin's first target upon its completion was to be the Rebel Alliance base once it was discovered. It became known that Gallen sent an Imperial cargo pilot who was sympathetic to the Rebel Alliance, named Body Rook, to deliver a message to Saw Gerrera, who was on the planet Jeddah. But when the latter arrived and delivered the message, he was imprisoned by the old rebel, who had grown paranoid and distrusted Rook's defection. The Empire, knowing that Rook held sensitive information, announced a big bounty for his capture, bringing what otherwise would have been a minor defection to the attention of Rebel Alliance intelligence, who started investigating and hearing rumors of a planet killer and Gallen's message, but could not get into contact with Gerrera and his rebel group, called Partisans. They needed someone who could reach out to Saw, and to this end, they rescued and recruited Gallen's long-lost daughter and old associate of Saw, Jyn Erso. The mission was to be led by Rebel Alliance intelligence officer Cassian Andor, who would be accompanied by Jyn Erso and his rewired KX security droid K2SO, and they were to head to the holy city of Jeddah to try to establish contact with the Partisans and then to find the pilot and the message. They did not have to wait long, as they were caught in one of the Partisan attacks against the Empire and escaped by the skin of their teeth with the aid of Baze Malbus and Chirrut Imwe, former guardians of the Kyber temple that once stood in Jeddah. This rescue was temporary, as they were soon captured by the Partisans. Jyn revealed who she was and her relation to Gerrera, so they were to be taken to him as prisoners. After a heated reunion, Gerrera showed Jyn the message in which her father revealed his efforts in undermining Project Stardust and the ultimate weapon, named the Death Star. While Gallen was working on the main weapon and the power supply of the station, he secretly placed a flaw within the reactor of the station, creating an easy way to destroy it. If the reactor was destroyed, the entire station would go with it. In order to find the reactor, they needed to get the Death Star schematics, which he revealed were housed in the Imperial data vaults on the planet Scarif. Before they could leave, however, the Death Star entered the orbit of Jeddah under the command of Grand Moff Tarkin, who wanted to test the now complete station and destroy Saw Gerrera and the security breach caused by Rook. On his command, the station fired directly at the Holy City, destroying it nearly instantly and causing a shockwave that nearly killed the rebel team. Cassian, Jyn, Baze, K2 and Chirrut were rescued by Rook. Gerrera and his partisans were not as fortunate. Having escaped Jeddah, they quickly jumped into hyperspace bound for Edu, with the intention of rescuing Gallen as requested by Mon Mothma, but due to the stormy climate, crashed on the planet's surface. They decided to continue their rescue operation, but before they managed to save Gallen, the rebel Blue Squadron attacked the base at the command of Rebel General Draven, resulting in Gallen's death. This showed that different groups within the rebellion were still vying for their goals and were uncoordinated. With nothing else to do on the planet, Cassian's group stole an Imperial Zeta-class shuttle and returned to the rebel base at Yavin 4. The rebel council was summoned on the moon, and Jyn and her comrades presented their evidence of the Death Star and its ability to destroy entire planets, to the shock and alarm of the council members. Nearly all of them were now advocating for peace or calling for the disbanding of the alliance, much to Jin's fury, who demanded an attack on Scarif to recover the plans and then destroy the Death Star. This plea was ignored. Storming out of the council room, Jyn was met by her comrades, who informed her of their willingness to embark on the Scarif mission. Many other rebels were fed up with the Council's indecisiveness, and also wanted to join her group. She accepted their offer and gave them their thanks. They left Yavin aboard the captured shuttle under the call sign Rogue One. The planet was protected by an orbital shield gate, but Rogue One's Zeta-class heavy cargo shuttle had access codes. Having bypassed the security shield over Scarif, Rogue One landed with Cassian, Jyn and K2 disguising themselves, and they made their way to the Citadel to get the schematics, while the rest of the team set up for a diversionary attack. On Jin's command, rebel commandos blew multiple explosives on the launching pads around the Imperial base, and the action on Scarif commenced. After the bombs on the landing platforms were detonated, Krennic, who had arrived moments earlier, ordered an immediate response, and the garrison was deployed to the platforms, believing they were facing a large attack. The jungle helped the rebels, and their unit, led by Baze and Chirrut, ambushed the stormtroopers upon their arrival, who sustained heavy losses and were pinned down. The rebel attack was also aided by Rook and his men, who from their ship were misdirecting Imperial units through the comms and diverting even more men from the Citadel. Their attack was eventually pushed back, however, by the garrison's AT-ACT walkers. The walkers were terrifying killing machines, with armor impenetrable to the rebels' small arms. The rebels were pushed back to the beach, and many were killed along the way, just as the last of them were about to be cut down. X-Wing starfighters from Blue Squadron suddenly appeared. Their weapons were more than capable of fighting the AT-ACTs. The X-Wings were unopposed, and the rebels easily destroyed the walkers, halting the Imperial advance. The main forces of the Rebel Alliance had arrived. Hearing the Imperial dispatch that Scarif base was under attack, Rebel Commander Admiral Raddus learned that this was Rogue One's doing. He gathered his forces and made way to Scarif, contradicting the orders of the Council, much to the encouragement of the soldiers who joined him. The rebel fleet consisted of Admiral Raddus's MC-75 star cruiser, the Profundity, 4 Brahatok-class gunships, 6 CR-90 corvettes, 3 EF-76 Nebulon B escort frigates, 3 Srena-class Hammerhead corvettes, 12 GR-75 medium transports, and were supported by fighter wings Blue Squadron, Green Squadron, Red Squadron, and Bomber Wing Gold, as well as the Ghost belonging to the Spectre Cell, which liberated Lothal from the Empire. The Imperial orbital garrison was situated around the shield gate itself, which was immobile, but held capable defense guns, as well as a considerable number of TIE fighters within its docking bay. This was complemented by 2 Imperial I-class star destroyers, Admiral Gorin's Intimidator and the Persecutor. Defending a relatively unimportant planet, the garrison was quite relaxed by the time Raddus's fleet appeared. The Imperials were only getting reports that the surface battle was won, and thus left the shield gate open. As soon as the rebel fleet appeared, however, the balance of power shifted, and Raddus ordered Blue Squadron under General Antok Merrick to support the surface attack. Many of his fighters and support ships got through before the shield gate was closed and helped their comrades. Now, with the ground situation stabilized, Raddus went on the offensive, sending Gold and Green Squadron to probe the shield gate to re-establish contact with Rogue One as the gate blocked their transmission frequencies. Ghost and Red Squadron were to defend the main fleet, while the rest of the fleet kept the Star Destroyers at bay. However, instead of using his superior firepower, Admiral Gorin took up a defensive position to protect the shield gate as he was waiting for reinforcements. The shield's defensive emplacements were too strong to overcome, and the rebels weren't able to break the shield with their medium craft bombers, and they were forced back when the TIE squadrons were launched as the Imperials outnumbered them. Raddus sent Red Squadron in to reinforce them, but the battle was by now going ill, with 1 GR-75 transport as well as 1 Brahatok gunship destroyed, with the rest of the fleet heavily battered. However, the rebel admiral knew that retreat was not an option, and so continued to press the attack. At this time, all of the TIE fighter squadrons were fighting within the perimeter of the rebel fleet, which left the Imperial Star Destroyers vulnerable. When a breach opened in the TIE fighters' right flank, it was noticed by John Vander, commander of Gold Squadron, who ordered his bombers to form on him and immediately made a run on the Persecutor with ion torpedoes and disabled the vessel. Suddenly, the rebels received a signal from Rogue One, as Rook was able to get through the shield's jammer. Rook told Raddus that they had the Death Star plans, but they needed him to destroy the shield gate to send the data files, as they were too large to get through while it was still up. After confirming that he would do so, Raddus formed an ingenious plan. One of his Hammerhead corvettes, Lightmaker, captained by Caedo Okane, was called up to implement it. After the crew was safely evacuated, with the exception of Okane and a skeleton crew, the Lightmaker broke off from the fleet and made a large swing around the Imperial's right flank, before turning alongside the starboard side of the Persecutor and then ramming straight into it. Lightmaker's crew ignited full thrusters after impact, causing the Persecutor to turn left straight into the Intimidator. Admiral Ghorman ordered reverse thrusters, but by now Persecutor was turning too rapidly and smashed into the upper castle of the Intimidator, severing it in half and permanently knocking both ships out. Persecutor and Lightmaker then both crashed into the shield gate ring and destroyed it. This allowed rebels on the ground to send a signal, and almost immediately the Profundity received a transmission from Scarif as Jyn successfully transmitted the plans from the top of the tower. With operational objectives achieved, the rebels started planning to rescue the ground forces and return to Yavin. But as they were making preparations, the Death Star exited hyperspace, with Darth Vader and capital ships not far behind. Knowing that Vader could handle Raddus's fleet, Tarkin ordered a single reactor ignition volley upon the Scarif citadel to safeguard their secret plans. Even the deliberately weakened shot from the Death Star was destructive, and this blast resulted in the deaths of Krennic, Rogue One, and all forces that were upon Scarif. With evacuation impossible, the rebel ships now began their jump to hyperspace. Half of the fleet successfully escaped, but Darth Vader's Devastator suddenly emerged from hyperspace, causing the rest of the fleet to pull away, with one GR-75 crashing into the hull of the Devastator and being destroyed instantly. The sheer firepower unleashed from the Devastator obliterated a Nebulon B frigate in a matter of seconds, and then pounded the already weak shields, destroying them and disabling the Profundity. This gave time for the rest of the fleet to escape, while Darth Vader boarded the Profundity to secure the Death Star plans they had taken. However, before he could get them, a few of the rebels escaped with the plans on Captain Antilles' ship Tantive IV, which was docked in the hull, and despite not being fully repaired, jumped into hyperspace with Vader in hot pursuit. So concluded the Battle of Scarif. The operation was a great success for the Rebel Alliance, with the only major blows being the loss of the Profundity, Admiral Raddus and General Merrick, while the Empire lost all of the Scarif garrison. The fact that the Rebel Alliance now had the Death Star's plans meant that they now had a chance to destroy Palpatine's monstrous battle station. This battle, which was minor in size and number of participants, was about to change the course of galactic history. With the Death Star's plans on board, Tantive IV's captain, Ramus Antilles, set course for Tatooine, which was its original destination before the Scarif operation, hoping to evade the pursuit of Vader's Devastator. On board the Tantive IV was the daughter of one of the leaders of the rebellion, Bail Organa, Princess Leia, and her mission was to find the Jedi Master, Obi-Wan Kenobi, who had been in exile since the Great Jedi Purge. He was to be given the Death Star plans, and then escorted to Alderaan. However, the Devastator managed to follow Tantive into hyperspace, and upon exit, crippled the rebel ship in a matter of minutes, drawing it within its hangar, ignoring the ship's broadcast of being on a diplomatic mission. The rebels attempted to use the escape pods, but the first ones were shot down by the Devastator, so they resolved to stand and fight. As stormtroopers were about to breach the ship, Leia gave the plans to an astromech, designated R2-D2, ordering it to go to the surface in one of the pods and deliver her message and the plans to Kenobi. The ship was boarded and a brief firefight broke out in the halls, resulting in the death of nearly all of the Alderaanian Consular Security Force. However, their resistance allowed R2-D2 and the protocol droid C-3PO to escape in a pod, which the Imperials didn't shoot at, detecting no organics. The droids landed in the desert with no settlement for miles, and were then captured by Jawas, native inhabitants of the planet who specialized in scavenging abandoned items such as droids and selling them. As such, their captivity was not long, as they were sold by them to a moisture farmer named Owen Lars. While they were in his care, Owen's nephew, Luke Skywalker, discovered Princess Leia's message and sought to find this Kenobi, thinking it may be the hermit Ben who lived nearby. Despite C-3PO's protest, R2-D2 struck out alone the next day, determined to deliver this message, which forced Luke and C-3PO to go out and recover him. However, they were set upon by another native group, Tusken Raiders, and were nearly killed until the hermit Ben arrived, scaring the raiders away. He confirmed that he was the legendary Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi, and then took the trio back to his home. Seeing Leia's message, he realized that he couldn't stay out of the war and decided to go to Alderaan. He attempted to recruit Luke, revealing that he was the son of his old friend and a very powerful Jedi, Anakin Skywalker, who was killed by Kenobi's apprentice, Vader. Initially, Luke refused to join Kenobi on the way to Alderaan, but soon after returning home, he discovered the remains of his aunt and uncle, and his home burnt to ash, most likely by the Imperial stormtroopers who were still searching for the droids. With no other option, and eager to avenge his family, Luke joined Kenobi. They made their way to Mos Eisley Spaceport and hired the captain of a Corellian YT-1300 light freighter, the Millennium Falcon, Han Solo, and his Wookiee co-pilot Chewbacca. Eager to pay off the debt to a local crime lord, Jabba the Hutt, Solo accepted Kenobi's lucrative offer, and the unlikely crew set off from Tatooine, despite an attack by stormtroopers that came too late. Meanwhile, Leia was now detained on the Death Star, which was in the Alderaan system, and the Emperor used her involvement with the Rebel Alliance to finally put an end to the Galactic Senate, dissolving the body entirely. Palpatine, now no longer constrained by the protection of senatorial status, imprisoned many of the senators on Coruscant, ending the threat the rebels had posed from within. The completed Death Star was the most powerful force in the galaxy, and so there was no longer a need to retain control of the galaxy through the use of the Senate. The might of the Empire was the only thing keeping the planetary system at bay, and the threat of the Death Star would keep them quiet, but the Emperor and Tarkin knew that a show of force and a demonstration of the power of their new weapon was needed. Among those now no longer protected by their senatorial status was Princess Leia, who was tortured at length for the location of the main rebel base. As the torture failed to work, Tarkin threatened to blow her home planet up if she refused to provide the location of the rebels. Leia tried to deceive her captor and named the planet Dantooine, the rebel base that was abandoned previously. Despite that, Tarkin ordered the Death Star to destroy Alderaan, which was considered one of the centers of the rebellion and thus was a threat. More than 2 billion civilians were killed in the destruction of the planet, among them Bail Organa. The news of its destruction spread rapidly, terrifying some while stealing the resolve of others. The Alderaanians on Coruscant held a vigil that turned into a riot that lasted for several days, but they were put down brutally by the stormtroopers. Many Alderaanians and their sympathizers joined the rebellion. Meanwhile, having successfully escaped and arrived in Alderaanian space, the Millennium Falcon was seemingly caught in a meteor shower, but as it ventured further, the crew was puzzled as to why Alderaan was not there. Kenobi, who felt the death of the billions in the Force, said it was the Empire's doing, and that they had destroyed the planet, but this was dismissed by Solo, who said not even an entire fleet could have done this. Before they could learn the truth, the Falcon was attacked by a single TIE fighter acting as a scout, which Solo followed, believing he could destroy it, with no Imperial bases around him to escape to or get help from. What he originally thought to be a moon was soon discovered to be the Death Star, which the scout had been luring them to, and they were caught in its tractor beam before they could escape, and were taken aboard. Using Solo's smuggler tactics, Kenobi's Jedi skills, and R2's hacking, the crew of the Falcon managed to not only avoid capture, but disabled the tractor beam and freed Princess Leia, saving her from execution. However, when they had almost escaped, the crew was accosted by Darth Vader. The Emperor's enforcer, who had waited a long time to avenge his previous crippling defeat at Kenobi's hands, was eager to destroy his old master, and the two began to duel. It started with Kenobi's taunt. "You cannot win, Darth. If you strike me down, I shall become more powerful than you can possibly imagine." Vader took a very cautious approach, which was uncharacteristic of his style, but he knew just how dangerous Kenobi was, and the old Jedi was just trying to distract Vader and the stormtroopers, which allowed the crew to make their way to the Falcon. Upon seeing that, Kenobi stopped fighting, letting Vader strike him. However, once the blow found its mark, Kenobi vanished, with nothing left but his saber and a slashed robe. The duel gave the crew of the Falcon enough time to board their ship, and the freighter escaped from the Death Star hangar. A half-dozen Imperial TIE fighters were sent to pursue them, but the rebels were able to destroy the enemy starships, making the jump to hyperspace and the safety of Yavin 4. The crew was in a celebratory mood, but Leia knew that the Imperials had let them escape and had probably placed a tracker on the ship, but hoped that the Death Star plans might swing the battle in their favor. When they arrived, the plans were immediately given to General Dodonna for assessment, and soon Gallen's design flaw was found and the plan conceived. Dodonna decided to send the remaining pilots of Gold, Red and Green Starfighter squadrons alone against the Death Star, as the monstrous station would have a harder time hitting them than any medium or heavy craft. The pilots were ordered to attack a single 2-meter wide exhaust port with their proton torpedoes, which, once successfully entered, would go all the way down to the reactor chamber and set off a reaction that would destroy the Death Star. Not long after, the Death Star arrived in the system and began orbiting Yavin Prime to get into position to fire at its moon Yavin 4, situated on the other side of the planet. Luke joined Red Squadron as a pilot with his childhood friend Biggs. Solo, meanwhile, had received his payment for his aid and left Yavin to pay his debts, intending to not be part of the battle to come. To many, this seemed like a suicide mission, but the pilots sent out were invigorated and could be counted on to fight till the last. The rebel forces consisted of 22 T-65B X-Wing starfighters that were divided between Red Squadron, commanded by Garvin Drace, and Green Squadron, commanded by an unknown pilot. The X-Wings were to serve as a distraction as well as an escort for the 8 BTL A4 Y-Wing bombers of Gold Squadron, commanded by John Vander, as the bombers were supposed to make an attack run through the Meridian Trench of the Death Star, which was guarded by 20 turbo lasers, and then to the exhaust port. The Imperial force was made up of the battle station itself, the Death Star, which had 15,000 turbo laser guns, along with 768 tractor beam emplacements, and was complemented by several hundred TIE fighter squadrons within its hangars. The Death Star was also accompanied by the Imperial II-class Star Destroyer Fortitude, but this ship was used in a defensive posture. The rebel squadrons exited the surface of Yavin 4 and made their way towards the target, and with 15 minutes left for the Death Star to get into firing position, they confirmed their numbers, locked their S-foils into attack position, beginning the Battle of Yavin. Just as Dodonna had assessed, the Death Star's surface guns were too widely dispersed and too slow to catch the starfighters, which dodged and picked them off with relative ease. With these reports coming in, Darth Vader ordered his personal Black Squadron to attack, determining that the battle would have to be won in ship-to-ship combat. Vader's appearance proved to be enough to start changing the situation, but wasn't entirely enough, as he was fighting the best fighters the Rebel Alliance had to offer, and they were a match for any of his best Imperial pilots. Determining the way was safe, Commander Vander took Gold 2 and Gold 5 with him to make the first attack run into the trench. They entered and navigated most of it with relative ease, as the defensive guns stopped shooting at them. At this point, Darth Vader entered the trench after them in his TIE Advanced, accompanied by 2 TIE fighters, and himself destroyed all 3 of the ships and exited the trench. As the battle still raged, Imperial officers analysed the rebel attack and discovered the flaw in the Death Star that could be fatal. but Tarkin dismissed this, saying, "Evacuate? In our moment of triumph? I think you overestimate their chances." With 3 minutes left for the Death Star to get to its shooting angle, Commander Dries took Red 10 and Red 12 to begin the second attack run. Although they knew that the Imperial TIE fighters would show up again, they took the same path, as it was now easy to traverse. Indeed, Vader was in pursuit again, and managed to destroy Red 10 and Red 12 soon. Drais got in range and launched his torpedoes, but was unable to hit the target. He was then chased and cut down by Vader. With only 1 minute to spare, Luke took command of the next attack run and entered the Meridian Trench at a high speed, accompanied by Wedge Antilles' Red 2 and Biggs Darklighter's Red 3. His wingmates hung back to cover him from the enemy fighters, while Luke himself attacked the target. Just like clockwork, the guns fell silent and Vader and his support arrived. The Imperials quickly caught up with the X-Wings, damaging Red 2, who was ordered to disengage by Luke. The chase continued on, with Vader letting the ship flee, and now it was left to Luke's friend Biggs to distract the TIE fighters long enough to allow Luke to take his shot. However, soon his craft was severely damaged and then destroyed before he could pull up, leaving Luke as the only fighter left to complete the mission. He turned on his targeting system, knowing that at any moment now the battle would either be won or lost. But as he drew closer, he heard the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi telling him to rely on the Force and trust his feelings. Vader sensed this disturbance in the Force and became intrigued by this pilot, finding it harder to hit him. Luke trusted Kenobi and turned off his computer to the alarm of the Rebel base and confirmed he would proceed without it. Just as Vader had locked on to Luke, the ship guarding his right suddenly burst into flames, catching Vader off guard. It was the Millennium Falcon arriving overhead. Its cannons forced Vader's wingmate to dodge, and the TIE fighter hit Vader's vessel, sending it careening into space. With his flank secured, Luke took the shot, with both torpedoes finding their mark, and he pulled off, accompanied by what remained of the Rebel force. With the Death Star's laser set to go off, the station exploded from the chain reaction caused by Luke's torpedo. The explosion sent shrapnel throughout the system and heavily damaged the nearby Fortitude, which forced it to retreat. Despite the fact that the Empire still retained nearly all of its fleet and still controlled most of the worlds, the battle was disastrous for its rule. The Death Star explosion not only cost them thousands of highly qualified officers, but the political fallout was devastating, as with no Death Star to serve as a threat, the Emperor's will would be hard to maintain. The Battle of Yavin was the harbinger of the new era, and the whole galaxy would start using "after the Battle of Yavin" to denote the years after this dramatic change in the galaxy. The Rebel Alliance was now considered an effective organization, and soon those oppressed by the Empire started to flock to the Rebel cause in the thousands. However, the Rebels knew that the Empire would strike back, and that they needed to abandon their main base on Yavin 4. So after a brief ceremony in which the heroes of the Rebel Alliance, Luke Skywalker and Han Solo, were awarded medals of bravery, they immediately began their evacuation. During the preparations, Leia Organa snuck away with her compatriot Evan Verlaine, who was the only Gold Squadron fighter to survive the battle. Both from Alderaan, their mission was to rescue those remaining Alderanians who were off-world at the time of the disaster, as they were being hunted by the Empire. They managed to save a large number of Alderanians using Sullust as their base, and after a brief battle above Sullust, which saw the Alderanians victorious, she left Verlaine in command and returned alone to Yavin, where the evacuation was still underway. Meanwhile, Emperor Palpatine was purging many of the old officers, replacing them with officers who were skilled and daring. The Navy was reorganized down to the TIE fighter squadrons, so as to combat the quicker X-Wing pilots more efficiently. Imperial ships were immediately sent out to hunt all suspected rebels. The prime target was Yavin 4, but the vanguard, led by a lone Imperial Star Destroyer, was foiled, and the rebel fleet managed to escape. General Draven knew that Yavin would mean nothing if the rebels did not capitalize on it, so he urged for an immediate assault to cripple the Empire's war industry and selected Simoon 1 in the Corellian Industrial Cluster as the target, as its sabotage would be a setback for the Empire. Captain Solo was to lead the mission, along with the crew of the Millennium Falcon. He pretended to be an envoy of Jabba the Hutt, as the Empire was making a deal for resources with the Hutt, and it was known that Solo used to work for the crime boss. The rebels were able to infiltrate the factory, setting the reactor to explode, freeing a number of slaves in the process. However, the arrival of Darth Vader changed things. The rebels attempted to kill the Sith as he landed, but failed. The Emperor's enforcer sensed the presence of the pilot who had destroyed the Death Star, so he took command of the garrison, eager to catch the rebels. Vader forced his way into the factory, despite the heavy resistance his troops faced, with the former slaves now aiding the rebels, and managed to find Luke and nearly killed him had it not been for Solo's intervention with a commandeered AT-AT Walker, which they used to blast their way out. The rebels managed to escape to the Millennium Falcon after Luke set the reactor off, destroying the factory. This Imperial setback gave the rebels some breathing room, allowing Luke to continue his mission to find a suitable location for a new base. The rebellion continued its guerrilla-style operations, and one of the missions conducted during this period was to free the senators held in the Arth Eno prison upon Coruscant to be executed. The operation was led by Eneb Rey, who was one of the few rebel spies on Coruscant. He was able to infiltrate the facility, but soon after learned that the Emperor was personally visiting the prison to watch the execution. The spy contacted Leia, who gave the green light to alter the plan. Rey gathered all local agents, and they disguised themselves as the imprisoned senators. The rebels ambushed the Emperor as the execution was underway, seemingly killing him. But to Eneb's dismay, he discovered it was a decoy, and the real Palpatine was aboard a ship overlooking the facility, which exploded just as he planned, with only Eneb surviving. Palpatine had not only gotten rid of the rebellious senators and spies of Coruscant, but he used the event to frame it as a terrorist attack made by the Rebel Alliance. At this same time, the Emperor blamed Vader for the recent failures of the Empire and humiliated him by stripping him of his role as second-in-command, sending him on small diplomatic missions and checking on garrison commands. Simultaneously, Palpatine hired scientist Silo to create a cybernetic replacement for Vader. All of this drove Vader to employ bounty hunters Boba Fett and Black Krrsantan to find the mysterious Force-sensitive pilot who destroyed the Death Star. In the hopes of building his own secret power base, Vader also recruited the archaeologist and droid expert Dr. Cheli Afra to build him a private army of droids. Despite their best abilities, the bounty hunters failed to catch Luke, with only Fett coming close. He was able to give Vader the name of his prey, Skywalker. Vader knew that name from his past life, and that sent him into a ceaseless search for Luke that would ultimately steer the course of the war. That course would start on the planet Vrogas Vas. The planet was used as a refueling depot for the Alliance, housing a few rebel squadrons, that included Luke's Red Squadron. Vader learned from Afra that Luke was on Vrogas Vas, and that one of his possible replacements, Mon Calamari cyborg Commander Carbin, was sent by the Emperor to capture the rebel. In order to get to the rebel pilot before Carbin, Vader flew to Vrogas Vas on his own without any reinforcements. Coming out of hyperspace to find 3 rebel fighter squadrons in front of him, Vader initially thought it was a trap, possibly set by Afra, but the latter frantically denied it. In reality, the rebels were just as surprised, as they were doing training maneuvers. Nevertheless, they engaged Vader, thinking he was a scout, and despite Afra's insistence that he retreat, the Emperor's enforcer charged directly at them, citing it should be they who should run from him. Thus began the Battle of Vrogas Vas. The rebel pilots thought that the TIE fighter they perceived as a scout would be easy to dispose of, but it was Vader, who was one of the best pilots in the galaxy. His TIE Advance made quick work of Blue Squadron, annihilating them with such precision and speed that they had no time to fall back nor counter him. Next came the Yellow Squadron, made of Y-Wings, who targeted him with their proton torpedoes. This also didn't work, as Vader caused them to detonate prematurely with the Force, annihilating the whole squadron in the process. Before he could do the same to Red Squadron, he was charged by a lone X-Wing, which broke formation and charged at him, dodging all of his fire. This was Luke, which the Sith discovered moments after their ships collided with one another, causing both to crash down onto the planet, just as Luke had intended, hoping that it would kill Vader. The Red leader, Ahul Nara, immediately sent out a signal to the Rebel command, informing them that Vader had been shot down on Vrogas Vas and asking for immediate assistance to get rid of the Emperor's most capable and deadly asset. Princess Leia and the crew of the Millennium Falcon would answer the call, departing the main fleet with the land troopers of Delta Squad. Simultaneously, Aphra, who lost communications with Vader, decided to join the fray to confirm if he was still alive and see if she could aid in the capture of Luke. On the planet, the rebels were trying to kill Vader and help Luke. The Rebel command then sent the Y-Wing Grey Squadron to bomb his location, but before they started their run, Vader used the Force to toss stones and the wreckage of his fighter, managing to destroy all of the Y-Wings. Eventually he was surrounded by an entire armoured company that demanded his surrender, telling him he was hopelessly outnumbered, to which he replied, "All I am surrounded by is fear, and dead men." A Force user of considerable strength, Vader was just too strong for the Rebel troopers, despite the fact they had tanks with them. Using the Force, he detonated their grenades, and then used his lightsaber and Force choke to dispose of the remaining troopers. Despite his power, the fighting took up most of the day, with Vader having to deal with the reinforcing battalion as well. Meanwhile, Dr. Aphra had arrived, accompanied by her 2 droids, and began hunting Skywalker. Using subterfuge, she managed to capture the young rebel, but the timely arrival of Han Solo and Chewbacca saved the situation, and they escaped on the Falcon. On the other side of the battlefield, Vader was attacked by a rebel T-47 airspeeder belonging to the Cyan Squadron, but it wasn't nearly enough to kill him, and the airspeeder was destroyed. Leia meanwhile had taken the Delta Squad and attacked Vader, but the troopers were no match for him and were soon killed. Leia was left as the only survivor, as Vader hoped that Luke would come to her aid. She knew this would happen, so she called the Y-Wing Amber Squadron to bomb her position, hoping that it would kill Vader in the process. However, before the squadron started its bombing run, it was attacked and destroyed by a TIE Fighter squadron belonging to the Imperial Force led by Commander Carbin that just arrived. The leak picked up by Aphra had been intentional. Carbin wanted Vader to destroy the rebels and then mop up what was left on Vrogas Vas and capture Skywalker. Vader couldn't leave this challenge unopposed, and as soon as Carbin landed on the planet, he was attacked by the Sith, which in turn allowed Leia to escape to aid Han Solo and Chewbacca. Although Carbin was cybernetically enhanced, he stood no chance against a Sith Lord and was quickly killed. This gave the crew of the Falcon enough time to escape the planet, despite the fact that they were attacked by Aphra and Chrysanthemum, the former of which they captured. The Battle of Vrogas Vas was one of the worst losses the Rebel Alliance suffered in the early portion of the conflict. Not only had they lost a refueling depot, but also grey, yellow and blue X-Wing squadrons, amber and grey Y-Wing squadrons, nearly all of the ground forces and equipment were also lost, while the Imperials had sustained minimal damage. Despite the losses suffered at Vrogas Vas, the rebellion was still capable of hurting the Empire, and soon was back on the offensive, starting a campaign within the Mid-Rim that would allow them to steadily gain a foothold in the region. Meanwhile, the Emperor sent Vader to Shu Torun, a planet vital for the Empire due to its richness in ore used for its war machine. The recently ascendant queen of the planet, Trios, was facing a rebellion of the nobles, led by Duke Rubix, who protested her rule and by extension the Empire. To assist Trios, Vader quickly set about finding dissident nobles and put down the rebellion by 1 ABY. Vader's ruthlessness rehabilitated him in Palpatine's eyes, and he was once again second only to the Emperor himself. Once again in command, Vader swiftly purged many Imperials, all of whom were blamed for the successes of the rebellion. During the Shu-Torun War, the rebels' main fleet had made a base in the Outer Rim at the abandoned Makota space station, and from there it was able to conduct effective sorties throughout the galaxy, as well as give their ships a much-needed refitting. They established contact with other rebel cells, and the rebellion was more unified than any time before. However, Vader's purge managed to inspire the Imperials, and the rebels knew that he would seek a pitched battle, so they needed a larger fleet. Their next target was to get more allies and a bigger fleet to even the odds. One of the groups that still hadn't rejoined the rebels was the Partisans of Saw Gerrera, who still resisted the Empire on Jeddah. The Imperials were still in need of the Kyber crystals mined on this planet, and Vader, knowing the Shu-Torun's affinity for engineering, asked Queen Tyros to be in charge of this operation. Leia and Trios initially fought against each other, but Leia was able to use diplomatic skills and the Queen's distaste for Vader's tactics to recruit her to the rebellion. Princess Leia then returned to Makota. She and Admiral Ackbar were convinced that the people of Mon Cala were likely to rebel, and the Mon Cala mercantile fleet was nothing to laugh at, as their cruisers were capable of being refitted into effective warships. This is what led the Empire to subjugate the planet prior to the war, and that event was still fresh in the minds of many of the Mon Calamari. Taking the crew of the Millennium Falcon as well as Admiral Ackbar himself, Leia set up a meeting with the regent of Mon Cala, Dors Urcha, to discuss the transfer of the mercantile fleet to the rebellion. They were interrupted by an Imperial squadron while discussing this and barely managed to escape. Urcha declined to support the rebellion, fearing the Imperial retribution, and so the rebels returned empty-handed. This did not deter Leia, however, and she proposed to High Command that they free the King of Mon Cala, Li Cha, who was imprisoned in an Imperial base on Strokil Prime. They conducted a brief operation in which they kidnapped Moff Tan Hubi, the unofficial governor of Mon Cala, and replaced him with a recruited changeling who impersonated the Moff, while Leia set off for Strokil Prime with the captured Moff. Once they infiltrated the base, they found Li Cha in a debilitated state, having never recovered from his wounds during the invasion, and living only while attached to life support machines. Despite this, he was able to give them a message, voicing his support for the people of Mon Cala to rise up and fight their oppressors. As he was finishing, Moff Hubi set off the alarm, which prompted a firefight that killed both Li Cha and Hubi. Nevertheless, the rebels were able to escape the base with the king's last words, which they took to Mon Cala. Urcha met them once more, but confiscated the message and arrested them, not giving them to the Imperials, but instead keeping them detained, as he was still trying to protect Mon Cala. This would never be enough to save his planet, as he soon learned that the Imperials, worried about the rebel activity in the region, were preparing to confiscate the mercantile fleet. Urcha knew that the Mon Cala could bear no such humiliation, and responded by playing Li Cha's message. This led to the Mon Calamari rising up and joining the rebels, killing all the stormtroopers aboard the fleet. The mercantile fleet, made up of 13 Mon Cala MC-80A Home 1 type heavy star cruisers, now needed to head for Makota in order to be refitted with turbolasers and other tools of war. But before the fleet managed to leave the gravity well of the planet, 5 Imperial II-class Star Destroyers, commanded by Admiral Tyrus Maori, entered the system and joined the 6th that was garrisoned here. Maori knew that the mercantile fleet lacked weapons, and that in their current form, Mon Cala cruisers were no match for his Star Destroyers, so he blockaded the rebellious ships and was overall slow to act. This allowed Admiral Ackbar enough time to respond to the Millennium Falcon's plea for help, and his own MC-80A arrived in the system, supported by a few wings of Y-wing bombers and X-wing starfighters. Maori recognized that the new enemy ship had changed the balance of power, but also realized that his 6 Star Destroyers would be too much for one Mon Cala Star cruiser to attack. he still hoped that the mercantile fleet could be captured, so instead of destroying them with his superior firepower, he ordered his contingent of TIE bombers to disable the helpless merchant ships. All this hesitation allowed Ackbar to bring his forces closer to the planet, and when the TIE bombers reached the mercantile fleet and started bombing their engines, they were quickly intercepted by the rebel X and Y wings, who had an easy time running the Imperial blockade. The rebel starfighters were just plainly better at dogfighting than the TIE bombers, and soon took the upper hand, crushing the enemy and creating a new situation. Our sources are not clear if Maori's directive was strictly capturing the mercantile fleet, but we know that he ordered his Star Destroyers to only open fire in the case that the Mon Cala ships tried to break the blockade. The rebels knew that it was only a matter of time before more Imperials joined this siege, making their situation even more untenable, so Ackbar asked Captain Pike Leela of Aurora Flare to act. Although it was suicidal, Leela knew that she had to sacrifice her ship to help her people and the rebellion. Thus, Aurora Flare started making its way towards Maori's flagship, Aquilifer. The Imperials opened fire and were close to overloading the ship's shields. Leela ordered all energy to be diverted to the forward shields, hoping that they would hold long enough. At this point, Maori was informed that Aurora Flare was transporting coaxium, the highly volatile hyperfuel, which meant that the explosion of the Mon Cala ship could destroy Aquilifer too. Maori commanded his ship to take evasive maneuvers, but it was too late. Leela ignited her cargo and then rammed into Aquilifer. The cruiser was gone, and although the Imperial Star Destroyer was not destroyed, it was disabled, which broke the blockade and allowed the rebel ships to first leave the planet's gravity and then join Ackbar. Soon, the rebels jumped to hyperspace on their way to Makotar. The Imperials, obviously angry with this, bombarded the planet for some time, killing many locals, including Urcha. Still, this was a massive victory for the rebels, who increased the size of their navy twofold. The ships came to the great satisfaction of both the rebels at Makotar and their Mon Calamari crews, who could now fight their dreaded enemy. To refit the cruisers, Leia recruited Queen Trios of Shu-Torun, who she had befriended following a mission on Jeddah. Trios put her engineers to work, making the cruisers into very formidable warships, and at their completion they were to be showcased to the allies of the Rebel Alliance at a grand celebration. Trios and many other sympathizers were invited. Morale was high at the base, with a flyby by Luke Skywalker and his fellow pilots, an overview of the Grand Fleet, which was comprised of 37 Star Cruisers, including 5 MC-75s, 12 MC-80 Liberties, 2 MC-80A Home Ones, 3 Mon Calamari Yavin's Hope types, 8 Mon Calamari Cruisers Geist type, and other Mon Calamari cruisers, complemented by dozens of starfighters. With the overview complete, Mon Mothma gave a rousing speech, promising that their fleet, their hidden sword, would free the galaxy and aid their allies whenever they were in danger. But just as the selected cruisers were to jump into hyperspace at the end of the speech, they did not move. Leia tried to contact Queen Trios to see if there was an engineering problem, but was informed she had left for her ship. The grim reality of what had happened set in when Darth Vader's Death Squadron exited hyperspace not far from Makotar. An Executor-class Star Dreadnought, 3 Imperial II-class destroyers, and a large complement of starfighters were closing in to the rebel base, led by Vader and his second-in-command, Admiral Kendall Ozzel. The rebels called for all hands on deck, but found their cruisers locked down, their weapon systems down, and their engines unresponsive. As the cargo bay doors would not open, the rebels would not be able to scramble their fighters. It was a trap. That run-in Leia had had with Trios on Jeddah was not by chance. Vader had given the rebels time to muster their strength and planted Trios in the rebellion so he could find and crush them in one place, a move not unlike the one Admiral Thrawn had done in the Lothal campaign. Vader ordered all ships to open fire upon the nearest cruiser, which was General Vanden Willard's ship, the Yavin's Hope, and it was destroyed within a matter of seconds, killing the crew and Willard. When Admiral Ozzel asked Vader for the next target, Vader responded, "Hope. Hope dies." Knowing that their situation depended upon undoing what the Shu-Torans did, Leia and General Bandwin Khor led a boarding party to capture Trios, who had fled to her ship, which was still docked by Rebel command. They were able to take the ship after a brief firefight, but Trios made it to the escape pod with seconds to spare and escaped. The rebels searched her ship, hoping to find anything that would free their vessels, but failed. The only thing the rebels managed to do was find a way to bypass the Shu-Toran lock on the bay doors. They could be opened by a ship by transmitting the codes obtained from Trios' vessel. They had to act fast, so General Khor took a small craft and attempted to transmit the codes, but his ship was destroyed by TIE fighters, which were killing anyone who fled the base or the cruisers. The rebel situation was desperate when the Millennium Falcon appeared behind the Imperial fleet, manned by Captain Solo, Chewbacca and C-3PO. They were immediately contacted by Leia, who told Solo what he needed to do. With nothing else to do, Solo made way for the nearest cruiser, Jan Dodana's Republic. Dodging TIE fighters along the way, as well as destroying a few turbolasers on one of the Star Destroyers, they nearly made it to the cruiser before they were engaged by Darth Vader himself in his advanced TIE. Solo tried to shake Vader, but was unsuccessful, as the latter was still the best pilot in the galaxy. The captain of the Millennium Falcon needed some kind of distraction to achieve his goal, and it came when the rebel cruiser of Commander Lajaya was destroyed by the Imperial Star Destroyers. Solo took advantage of the explosion and flew into the Inferno, losing Vader in the process. This gave him some breathing room, and he flew towards the Republic. C-3PO was jettisoned from the Falcon in an escape pod directly towards one of the airlocks of the cruiser and crawled into one of the Republic's airlocks. The droid found Luke and told him about the bypass, and the hangar doors were soon open, allowing the young rebel to immediately board his X-Wing and fly out. Seeing this, Wedge Antilles and the rest of the pilots followed Luke, which all formed up upon him. Needing a call sign, Luke dubbed them Rogue Squadron in honor of Jyn Erso's squadron, and immediately formed around Solo in order to allow the damaged Falcon to escape the battle. With the rest of the squadron fighting the enemy starfighters, Luke activated his light trail in order to catch Admiral Ackbar's attention and demonstrate how to open the hangar doors. This succeeded, and the fighters on Ackbar's Home 1 joined the Rogue Squadron. Solo managed to land his vessel, and as the rebels needed all the help they could get, the captain of the Millennium Falcon manned an X-Wing and entered the combat. Meanwhile, on Makota, the rebels finally caught a break. As they were searching through Trios' files, they discovered a way to free their ships, as there appeared to be an override code that could reboot the systems. The bad news was that those codes were aboard the Executor. It was becoming clear that the release of the rebel starfighters was not enough to save the day, as even more cruisers were going down. Vader ordered all of the TIE squadrons to leave their carriers and join the battle, which allowed the Empire to recapture the initiative yet again. It was time for desperate action, so Captain Draven and Leia took Trios' ship, accompanied by Draven's special forces, and started making way towards the Executor. Leia pretended to be the Queen, and as they had the correct responder codes, the rebels were able to successfully land aboard. The time they had was short, as Vader decided that his personal involvement was no longer needed, so he was on his way to the Executor to greet Trios. The team was able to get the codes, but they were soon discovered, and the Emperor's enforcer was now hot on their trail. Still, Leia was able to escape with the codes, using a commandeered TIE fighter, while the rest of the special forces and Draven stayed behind to slow down Vader. The Sith killed all of them. This was not the end of the danger for the Alderaanian princess. She had no way to signal her allies. Solo and Skywalker almost shot her down. However, Leia used the fact that the Imperial starfighters considered her to be one of their own. She shot down a TIE fighter, which convinced the rebels of her friendly intentions. Luke and Solo picked her up and escorted her to the Republic. The rebels started the transmission process. Unfortunately for them, it would take some time for the weapons and other systems to come online. and the Death Squadron continued to pound the cruisers. Trying to salvage his ship, Dodonna immediately jumped to hyperspace. Vader, however, was not concerned by this, as he had already caused a severe blow to the rebels, and he just ordered his Star Destroyers to keep firing. Thankfully for the rebels, Luke and Leia managed to convince Dodonna to return to the fight. Returning to the system from another angle, Republic made a strafing run over the top of the Executor, damaging Vader's flagship and grabbing the attention of the Imperial fleet. The Death Squadron was forced to reposition in order to cover the Executor, and this gave enough time for the remaining cruisers to come back online and join the fight. But Dodonna knew that the battle was already over and ordered the fleet to disperse. With his cruisers' engines destroyed, he intended to hold the Imperials off, and his crew fought to the bitter end as the rest of the fleet escaped. The Battle of Makota was a severe blow to the Rebel Alliance, as they lost 90% of their starfighters, 18 of their cruisers, as well as many of their veteran commanders, while the Empire's losses were limited to TIE fighters and stormtroopers. The Rebel fleet dispersed and was ordered to fight separately, with no base to link up at and no plan. They were divided and scattered, and were once again at square one. The battle, while not the total annihilation Vader had hoped for, was satisfactory to the Emperor, as the rebels no longer posed the threat they once did. Indeed, this led to a steady weakening of the rebellion with the beginning of the Mid-Rim Retreat. While the Alliance would try to outrun the Empire and could hide effectively, Vader promised that they couldn't hide forever. The Empire was on the offensive. After the disastrous ambush at Makota, Mon Mothma ordered the Rebel Alliance to once again go back to the separate fight strategy they had used before the Battle of Yavin. This meant the cancellation of all Rebel offensives, a defensive stance once again was taken, and minor guerrilla-style operations were the order of the day. While on paper this seemed to be easy, the reality of it was much different, as the largest campaign, that of the one within the Mid-Rim, had been going on for 9 months, and this new order turned everything around. The early accounts of the Rebel offensive are lost to us, as is much of the retreat and actions taken during the remaining months of 2ABY. But from what we do know, this was a colossal undertaking. Not only did the Rebel Alliance bring vast amounts of spacecraft and material to bear, but as they pushed forward and liberated worlds, they also fortified them and were connected with the independent native rebel cells, helping to establish governments on the planets and supplying them, making any withdrawal a long and arduous process. To this end, they ordered a number of battle companies to screen their retreat as the fleet withdrew from the Mid-Rim, accompanied begrudgingly by some of the native rebels, with many instead remaining. The one we know the most about in this campaign, and the one we'll be following, is the 61st Mobile Infantry under Captain Mika Ivan, which formed both the vanguard in the offensive stage and would be the rearguard in the retreat. They are better known by their second name, Twilight Company. Battle companies such as Twilight Company were not your standard infantry unit. Being designated as mobile, they were used as infiltrators and were equipped as such, having a number of fast corvettes to move them from planet to planet, making any attempt to take a system from them a time-consuming task. Twilight Company was equipped with one CR-90 corvette, known as Thunderstrike, which served as their HQ, one Brahatok-class gunship called Apilana's Promise, accompanied by 2 X-Wing fighters, and a number of smaller landcraft. The company's strategy was very similar to the rest of the mobile units, in that each operation was a distraction, but a distraction that couldn't be ignored, such as the seizure of depots or positions on a front line. These dangerous missions led to high casualty rates, but made these men deadly fighters. Their mobility and equipment made them forces that couldn't be ignored. This, coupled with native resistance, from which they drew most of their recruits, made them extremely formidable. As Captain Ivan put it, Twilight Company is fighting for the heart of the galaxy, for the spirit of every ordinary man and woman and Imperial stormtrooper. Stealing food won't help us win. Killing enemies won't either. Against might on the scale of the Empire, conventional victory is impossible. When our objectives become purely military, we've already lost.
In this they did well, as we can see their progress during the initial offensive of the campaign has taken much of the Mid-Rim in little more than a year. Twilight Company followed this same strategy throughout much of the retreat as well, targeting Imperial-occupied planets in need, and then moving to the next once the rescue was complete. They became so proficient at it that they delayed the Empire for nearly 2 years, allowing much of the fleet and their allies to escape various outposts. But by the middle of 3 ABY, much of the Mid-Rim had been taken back by the Empire save for the last outer remnants. During these last fights, namely the attack on Hyderul Prime, they gained an unexpected ally in the Imperial Governor of the planet, Averi Chalice. She would provide critical intel for Twilight Company, which they would use to great effect in the Coyote campaign, defeating the Imperial garrison there and destroying a biotoxin that would have been deadly for the native Coyote. They would do a number of missions after this, but with the main commander of the retreat, General Amrashad, being killed, and with most of their forces pulled out, they followed suit, heading to the rebel Echo base on Hoth. The Mid-Rim retreat was over. The main fleet during all of this time had still been searching for a new base, hopping from system to system while avoiding Vader's relentless search. They were still undergoing various small-scale missions to other planets, so as to undermine the Empire and serve as a distraction for the main fleet. One of these missions was directed towards Shu Torun, as it was a valuable planet for the Empire. The mission would be a success, temporarily knocking it out of commission for the Empire, and it resulted in the death of Queen Trios, the catalyst for their defeat at Makota. Eventually, the rebels were able to make a base and settled for Hoth, an ice planet in the Outer Rim. The base itself had been in the works for years, but this residence as HQ had only been a month old by the time the retreat in the Mid-Rim ended, showing just how long they'd been on the run and how hotly Vader was on their tail. With their forces pulled out and everyone hidden more or less, the rebels called a conference at Hoth to hear the defector Averi Chalice's information on the Imperial war machine, so as to understand the Imperial strategy and plan their next move, the first offensive operation in nearly 2 years. But they wouldn't get their chance. Soon after this meeting ended, a probe was downed at the Sian Range, not far from Echo Base, by Han Solo and Chewbacca while they were on a routine scouting operation. The base commander, General Karlis Rieekan, deduced that this must have been an Imperial probe, and taking Solo's advice, ordered code K-10, the base evacuation protocol. This probe, classed as Viper Probe XJ9CS14, was indeed an Imperial probe and was part of Project Swarm, which had started not long after the Battle of Yavin in search for the newest rebel base, and whilst it failed to find the second base at Makota, it would reap fruits now. It belonged to the Death Squadron, which proved to be the rebellion's ever-vengeful nemesis. Death Squadron had been scouting the nearby area since they ambushed a rebel convoy at Dera, and was alerted by increased rebel activity in the region. The squadron's makeup at this time was certainly formidable, as they were led as always by Darth Vader himself, supported by the commander of the fleet, Admiral Kendall Ozzel, and Flag Captain Firmus Piet. All three were on the flagship, an Executor-class Star Dreadnought named the Executor, and were accompanied by Vader's personal ship, a 1-class Star Destroyer, the Devastator, and 3 2-class Star Destroyers, among them Tyrant and Avenger. This was of course supplemented with a large number of starfighters and ground forces, among these the infamous 501st Legion, also known as Vader's Fist. The rebel forces stationed on Hoth, meanwhile, had much of their fleet, such as the Mon Color cruisers, elsewhere as mobile units, as they deemed putting them in a permanent base again too risky. So most of their forces were ground troops and craft to support them. Commander of the base was the aforementioned General Karlis Rieekan, and under him General Organa and Commander Skywalker. They were supplemented with 30 GR-75 transports, a moderate number of wing fighters such as T-65B X-Wing starfighters, BTL-A4 Y-Wing bombers, and T-47 airspeeders. Among these were Luke's Rogue Squadron and various others. Having been able to send the information it gathered before it initiated its self-destruct sequence, the Imperial probe had alerted Avenger as to the location of a power generator on Hoth, which Captain Piet believed was a rebel base. This was denied by Admiral Ozzel, who thought there isn't enough evidence to support that, believing it to be a smuggler base. Vader, however, overturned Ozzel's order and told the fleet to set a course to Hoth immediately, hoping to surprise the rebels. Meanwhile, on Hoth, there was a hurricane of activity as the rebels began loading their transports, which were stationed at the north entrance of the base. Many of them were initially non-combatants, as many had come for the conference, and the rest were medical staff and family members who had fled Imperial persecution. They had just finished loading the non-combatants when Death Squadron appeared in the system, and General Reekin ordered the base shield to be put up. This was a formidable shield and would resist any attempts made for orbital bombardment, and was in turn protected by a V-150 Planet Defender ion cannon situated on the south ridge, a powerful gun built as a planetary defense to disable capital ships. Having lost the element of surprise due to Ozzel's coming out of lightspeed too close to the planet, Vader had to settle on a costly ground assault, but not before executing Ozzel and placing the newly promoted Admiral Piet in overall command. The ground assault was to be led by the decorated officer Maximilian Veers, and he was given command of Blizzard Force, an elite unit of the 501st, which was specialized in fighting in cold environments such as Hoth. As they had just arrived to this planet, they had little in the way of scouting information, and settled for landing at a suitable place outside the shield's perimeter, that being the Morsh Moraine. Having landed with the assistance of Gazanti-class cruisers and escorts, the Imperials took a bit longer, as Veers deemed the larger Y-85 Titan dropships to be too vulnerable to attack in Hoth's conditions. During this, the rebels were able to get one of their transports, the Quantum Storm, out, as it escaped with its escort after the ion cannon had disabled the Tyrant. The Imperials had 12 AT-AT Walker groups, with each being given codename Blizzard, with Veers commanding Blizzard 1. Each AT-AT Walker was complemented with several AT-ST Walkers and a number of Snowtrooper squadrons. Blizzard 4's group, under Colonel Stark, attempted to impress Vader by going through the Kharain Valley, but was turned back to the main group after having lost 3 of their walkers due to the treacherous terrain. Blizzard Force eventually emerged from the fog atop the north ridge of the Nev iceflow, a valley which led directly to Echo Base. Once there, they were able to spot not only Echo Base, but the defences which lay in front of it, and realised that the land defences of the rebels were rather rudimentary. Small trenches, guarded by 1.4 FD P-towers and DF-9 turrets, as they'd been constructed only recently, and were divided into outposts, Beta, Echo and Delta, with the latter being the last before the base. But the soldiers manning them were battle-hardened troops, with some fighting even before the recent mid-rim campaigns. However, Outpost Beta was quickly overwhelmed by the swarming AT-ST walkers and snowtroopers, and its defenders fell back to Echo. Here the defense held up for a little longer. The rebel infantry knew that they couldn't defeat the AT-ATs with their near-impervious armor, so they resolved to hold up the AT-STs and ground troops. Still, eventually they were also pushed back, having bought the transport's valuable time. As Blizzard Force was now closing in on Outpost Delta, Rebel Command sent their T-47 airspeeders out to stall the AT-ATs, hoping as well that these could destroy them. Among these were Rogue Squadron, with Skywalker in command. They quickly found that their ships too couldn't destroy the slow behemoths that trod ever closer to the base, and settled for attacking the legs in the hopes of stalling them. This led to the destruction of some AT-ATs, 2 of these being Blizzards 2 and 4, as the clever rebels disabled the walkers' legs with a tow cable in one case, and in another, that of Colonel Stark's with a thermal grenade. This caused Veers to begrudgingly accept the rebels as far more competent than he'd anticipated. This heroic defense, however, only delayed the inevitable, as the airspeeders failed, and Blizzard 6, 8 and 9 cut through the Delta outpost. A general panic ensued within the base, as command itself went dark, possibly due to a shot from one of the AT-AT walkers. This led to a frantic retreat to the base, and many rebels were cut down during this. Just as this was going on, Blizzard 1 got within sight of the power generator, and Veers gave Vader the OK for landings, as shortly after he fired upon the generator and Echo Base's last defense fell. Almost instantaneously, Blizzard 1 was disabled when a damaged airspeeder, flown by Derek Clivian, crashed into its cockpit, severely injuring Veers and knocking it out of the fight, but it had done its damage. Vader soon made landfall near the base, accompanied by a small retinue of snowtroopers, and joined the main assault by punching a hole into the base on the eastern side of the mountain. From there, the battle turned into a wholesale slaughter, with many scrambling to the remaining transports, while Vader searched for Rebel Command and Skywalker. During this chaos, many of the rebels escaped from the south entrance in the Claburn Range to the evacuation site behind the South Ridge, which the Empire had neither found nor guarded, while the rest put up a makeshift defense, albeit not intentionally. Among them was the Twilight Company and its captain, Avan. Their resistance continued until Vader found and killed most of them, including the captain. But the ultimate goal of the Emperor's enforcer, the crew of the Millennium Falcon and Rebel Command, escaped, with the grounded Skywalker taking an X-Wing, while the Imperial forces ransacked the base for information, ending the engagement. The Battle of Hoth was a devastating blow for the Rebel Alliance. While not as costly as Makutar in terms of men and material, this was another hard blow, creating a feeling that nowhere was safe for the rebels. 17 GR-75 transports and Echo Base were lost, and thousands of rebels had died or were scattered, while the Empire had lost as little as 7 walkers and 500 men. Still, Vader's insistence on immediate action without having done any scouting, and a poor blockade of the planet led to many of the rebels escaping. The remnants scattered and went to secret locations where they would be given a rendezvous point and be able to meet up again. The rebels were defeated yet again, but not destroyed, and their next plan would not only turn their demoralizing streak of defeats, but the whole war on its head. Following the action on Hoth and the chaotic retreat in its aftermath, most of the established rendezvous assignments made by the rebels were not being executed, as the command structure broke down when base command was destroyed during the battle. This left the last of the rebels to fend for themselves until they could reach safety and re-establish contact with the Alliance. The crew of the Millennium Falcon was not as lucky as most, as they were the most infamous of the rebels within the Empire, and a constant thorn to many Imperial plans, so they of course were hotly pursued. Despite having a damaged hyperdrive, they were able to escape from this force with the use of an asteroid field and Han Solo's clever use of Imperial procedure. Having gotten the Imperials off his tail, Solo then headed to Bespin, home to Cloud City, which was governed by an old friend of his. As this was transpiring, the soldiers of the 61st Mobile Infantry, also known as the Twilight Company, were facing problems of their own. After leaving Hoth with their iconic commander dying in the fight, Twilight Company and their ship, Thunderstrike, regrouped with the flotilla and decided to aid one of its allied ships, the Trumpet's Call, as its life support systems had failed. But this turned out to be a ruse, as the crew was already dead, and in their place were Imperial spies, who flooded onto the Thunderstrike's bridge, killing all of their officers. Luckily, one of them, Lieutenant Saigon, was able to message the flotilla about what had happened, and they, with the exception of Apellana's promise, scattered. They were able to regain control of the vessel again and jumped to hyperspace, just as the Imperial prelate Verge arrived aboard the Star Destroyer Herald. Having narrowly dodged this trap, they rendezvoused on Ankarel for repairs, where many rebels were considering quitting the rebellion altogether. This shows the demoralized state in which the Alliance was, as even their veteran and most loyal company was considering abandoning the cause they had fought so hard for and for so long. But they came together nonetheless under the command of Acting Captain Hazram Namir, who knew that in order for Twilight Company to remain intact, they needed a distraction. To this end, he conducted a meeting with the Imperial defector Averi Chalice, who urged him to go with the target she had urged Rebel Command to attack at the Kuat drive yards. These shipyards were within the core region and produced a massive amount of the ships used by the Empire, as well as many of their vehicles, so a successful attack on such an objective would cripple the Imperial war effort, as more ships were needed to deal with the unrest generated by the rebellion. Kuat Drives, however, was protected, making a direct assault impossible with a 400-man force and 2 ships, but it still was not impossible to take, as most of the Imperial fleets were in the mid and outer rims hunting the rebels, with the core worlds having only garrison forces. So the plan was to attack a series of targets around but not near Kuat so as to avoid suspicion and get the defending force out of Kuat and afterwards attack Kuat. The rebels dubbed it Operation Ringbreaker and started waiting for their ships to finish repair to begin the operation. Meanwhile, Han Solo had managed to get to Bespin safely, meeting with his friend, the administrator of Cloud City, Lando Calrissian, who accommodated them. But it was a trap. Solo had escaped from the Imperials, but didn't realize that he was being tailed by none other than the bounty hunter Boba Fett, who informed Vader of Solo's most likely location and arrived there, with Vader forcing Calrissian to agree to help them trap Solo or face the wrath of the Empire. Knowing a threat from Vader was never idle, Calrissian agreed, and the crew of the Millennium Falcon was captured. After interrogating and torturing Solo, Vader had him frozen in carbonite to test the trap he had intended for Skywalker, and then handed Solo over to Fett as the Hutt clan still had a bounty on him. The rest of the crew, including Chewbacca and Leia, was kept on Bespin to await the arrival of Skywalker, and he didn't have to wait long. After Skywalker had arrived and began battling the Sith, Calrissian had found his opportunity to switch sides. He freed the remaining prisoners and then joined them, after issuing a general evacuation order for Cloud City. They made their way to the Falcon, having barely missed rescuing Solo, and not knowing that Skywalker had arrived. After some fierce fighting with the Imperials, they were able to board the Falcon. Its hyperdrive was now reactivated, and they quickly left, picking up the wounded Skywalker who had been defeated by Vader. During the battle, Vader severed Luke's hand and told him that he was his son. As all of this was transpiring, the 61st had gone on the offensive, attacking targets along the Rimmer trade route, such as the warehouses on Madonna 3, the Obumumbo Moon, the Najan Rovi dockyards, Nakadia, Nator, Zagobah, and the Kulukwo Belt, succeeding in all of these missions with minimal losses, and dodging all of the Imperial attempts to catch them. With these targets successfully destroyed, they would proceed to Sullust and Malastare, and after that, Chalice promised, Kuat would fall. But the Imperials wouldn't allow that to happen, and they were now commanded by a member of Emperor Palpatine's ruling council, Prelate Verge, who had been tracking Twilight Company since they recruited Chalice to their cause, knowing that she possessed substantial information. To this end, he convened with Captain Setaran to determine their next move. They quickly realized that Twilight Company was here, and that Chalice was certainly among them, as their successful attacks were all against crucial Imperial infrastructure of the region. Setaran had guessed a handful of their next targets, including Sullust, Malastare, and Shindrel, and prepared each for an impending attack. Soon, the 97th Legion stationed on Sullust alerted the Star Destroyer Herald that it was being attacked, and Setaran quickly dispatched Vixa's squadron to Sullust. As this message was going out, Thunderstrike and Apellana's Promise had just exited hyperspace over Sullust, and the 61st was rapidly deployed on the planet, giving no time for the Imperials to concentrate and respond effectively. Their objective was the mining facility on Mount Inyusu Tor. Having deployed their troops, Thunderstrike and its escorts left Sullust a safe distance away, and let the ground troops commence their assault. The Imperials were quickly pushed back, retreating into the facility and locking it down. They called on reinforcements from the nearby capital city of Pinyamb, but these were scattered before they could regroup with the facility's garrison. Not being able to break through the facility doors, the rebels hijacked the mining equipment outside and burrowed their way into the mines below. With their defenses broken, the Imperials inside were either killed or fled to the forces assembling down the mountain slope, and the rebels spent the night rigging the facility in order to blow it up once they left come morning. With their mission successful, they recalled their ships to pick them up, but after beating off a few TIE fighters and entering the atmosphere, the spaceship squadron of the 61st realized this was exactly where the Imperials wanted them, as Satron's plan sprung into action. The Vixa squadron emerged from behind Sullust's moon and attacked the Thunderstrike with overwhelming fire, causing it to crash on the surface. With the rest of the ships retreating on Namir's orders, the 61st was stranded on Sullust and at the mercy of the soon-to-be-arriving Prelate Verge. They first went to the wreck site and rescued and scavenged what they could, all the while fighting the 97th Legion, which had regrouped and continually harassed them in conjunction with the Phoenix Squadron. Still, the rescue was nevertheless successful, and the rebels managed to retreat to the facility. Chalice proposed that they should look to the city of Pinyub and look for help, as there was a local resistance cell. Deciding that it was the best course of action, Namir, Chalice and Twitch's squad left for the city aboard a captured troop transport, leaving Engineer Vifra with an order to fortify the facility. Once they got to the outskirts, they ditched the transport and disguised themselves. They found the city on lockdown due to their recent attack, but continued on, managing to evade the light patrols and looking for an old safe house which was supposed to be there according to the files of their old Captain Evon, all while keeping an eye out for the Solustan resistance. Not long after getting to the safe house, they were beset upon by stormtroopers, and during the skirmish, Namir was captured. However, his captivity was brief, as he was soon saved by the Solustan resistance, and they took him to their base, where they found out that the resistance would be of no use in helping them, as it consisted of only 4 people. But these fighters were now emboldened to fight for their planet, as Twilight Company's arrival was a spark of hope for them. Namir proposed a plan to unite with the other cells and take Pinyub, deciding that it was better to die fighting for the people of Sullust than continue the campaign and harass the Empire. The cell then assisted him in his return to the facility. Back there, he was told that Chalice and one of the scouts had made it back, and in his absence, she took over. Namir immediately started regaining command and making plans. However, Chalice ignored him and showed insubordination, for which she was immobilized by the soldiers, allowing Namir to regain control. The rest of the officers agreed to make their last stand on Inyusu Tor. They knew that the Empire would arrive, and so they made preparations. Arriving above the planet, Verge dispatched his forces to take the facility via ground assault. But the Twilight Company expected this and decided to use the fact that the Empire wanted the facility intact. The Imperial forces consisted of the 97th Legion, which had already established a siege line as best they could around the facility, a large but unspecified number of spaceships and stormtroopers sent to the surface by the Herald, as well as several airspeeder bombers and ATST walkers. The rebels, meanwhile, had only around 370 or so men, but they were nearly all veterans and were prepared to make the Imperials pay for every inch of ground as they crawled up the mountain. The assault began with a general bombardment of the area up around the facility, and then the Imperials advanced up the slope. Soon they came into contact with the first rebel line, situated behind rocks and various sorts of cover, who sprang out with each shot, finding a mark, stunning the advance. The bombing had done little to no damage to any of the rebels. Despite the heavy losses, the Imperials continued advancing, slowly getting closer, but as they did that, the rebels began to fall back. Once the Imperial advance reached the first line abandoned by the rebels, Namir's soldiers detonated the leftover iron mines, killing all nearby stormtroopers and downing an ATST. This caused massive casualties and allowed the rebels to fully retreat to the second line. This line was much more heavily fortified, with blaster cannons and mortars dotted all along the newly dug trench line. The stormtroopers were ordered to attack, and they started crossing the gorge under a hail of fire, losing many. When they were 50 meters from the trench, they let their ATSTs overtake the advanced line and storm the trenches. The walkers were able to breach the line, losing only one in the advance, and began wreaking havoc among the rebels, pinning them down. Namir knew that he'd have to destroy the walkers or lose his entire unit, so he ordered the squads to fall back to the perimeter of the facility and commenced a general bombardment of the second line. This worked, destroying nearly all of the Imperial walkers, but also cost the lives of several rebels who could not escape. Namir now gathered his men on the perimeter line and moved the wounded inside the facility as the Imperials regrouped. It was becoming clear that taking the facility fully intact would be impossible, so Herald entered the atmosphere and began blasting the outer defense line of the rebels, killing many. However, suddenly the Herald stopped. The Apailaner's promise had returned, along with its 2 X-Wing escorts, and began harassing the ship. It by no means could take out a Star Destroyer, but the Brahatok gunship could not be ignored. So the Herald turned its attention to the rebel vessel, giving the rebels on the ground some reprieve. This boosted the morale of the defenders, and left the Imperials on the ground to fend for themselves. The Imperials resumed their advance up the slope, but were suddenly counterattacked by the 61st, and the rebels temporarily halted the stormtroopers, forcing them to fall back. Soon the Emperor's henchmen received the order to push again, and restarted their advance. This counterattack, however, was a delaying tactic by Namir, and as soon as the enemy attacked, he ordered his soldiers to fall back. As soon as the rebels were back to the perimeter, he ordered Vifra to initiate her plan, and the lava channels that her team had spent days rechanneling burst onto the mountainside, sending the Imperials into disarray and dividing them in two. Those it failed to kill fled down the mountain, while others were forced to run towards the facility, where brutal close-quarters fighting broke out. The Imperial group left advancing on the facility was still substantial, and so all of the Twilight Company ran into the fray, knowing this to be the pivotal moment. Casualties were mounting rapidly for both sides, as the rebels tried pushing the enemy down the slope, while the Imperials, with nowhere to go, advanced with determination. Gradually, the rebels were forced back into the facility, and had to fight in the halls of the compound itself. Now, we have to go back for a moment. While the battle for the second line had been going on, Chalice had escaped custody and took a speeder to Pinyumb. Here, she stole a shuttle loaded with ion bombs and tricked the Herald into locking onto the ship and allowing her to dock. Thus, she brought the bombs on board. She was met by Prelate Verge and Setaran, and, ignoring pleasantries, used the detonator in her hand to set off the bomb, crippling the ship's systems and causing it to descend. Verge ordered the crew to continue the battle and began fighting Chalice to bring her to heel, but was stopped when he was shot in the back by Setaran, who knew that it was time to get rid of Verge's obsession and save the ship. This allowed Chalice to escape. Without its weapons working, the Herald was not going to win even against a small gunship, so Setaran gave his command to leave the system immediately. To the Imperial forces on the ground, this escape looked like a betrayal, and they started losing heart in their battle. Soon the rebels turned the tide and finished off the doomed Imperials, winning the battle. The Twilight Squadron had suffered heavily from their stand at Inyusu Tor, with roughly 120 being killed and 100 more being wounded. But the Imperials had it far worse, with all of the ground troops stranded on Sullust, killed or captured. The Resistance was able to group up with other forces and take Pinyumb during the battle, causing a series of revolts to break out all over the planet, eventually culminating in the planet's liberation within a few weeks. Twilight Company acted as a temporary police force for Sullust until the Rebel Alliance re-established contact with them, taking over the protection of the planet and allowing the 61st to depart. While the overall goal of Operation Ringbreaker failed, the Siege of Inyusu Tor would be a rallying cry to the people of the galaxy, showing that the rebels were not spent, and morale among the previously demoralized troops was high again. With the crack that the 61st had made in the Imperial armor, the Rebel Alliance was invigorated to strike at their foe once again. Their series of defeats had not made them abandon the cause, far from it. Vader's relentless pursuit and brutality in stamping them out could only ever serve to enrage them, and the 61st had given them hope again. But before they could strike, they would have to reunite. This was not easy to do, as many rebel groups had reservations about such a maneuver, worried that the ambush at Makota might be repeated. But nevertheless, they had all put their reservations aside, as Sullust had given the Alliance a high to ride on, and it was a do-or-die moment. To this end, the rebels held an emergency conference at Satiga in 4 ABY, during which the nature of their strategy was about to change. Alliance intelligence had discovered the Imperials were building yet another Death Star near the outer rim planet of Endor. Its targets were the worlds of Chandrila and Mon Cala, but it was largely incomplete and would take a while to be completed. That made it vulnerable, and the rebels knew this was the opportunity they had been waiting for. They decided to concentrate the fleet on the newly captured planet of Sullust and attack with their full force. But to assemble without detection, they needed time and secrecy. To this end, they concocted Operation Yellow Moon and Operation Starlight. The latter was devised by the rebel cell known as the 4th Division to deal with their code encryption problems, as without reliable codes, the Imperials were able to intercept them and take out the scattered rebels one by one. The plan was to steal a droid from the Imperial Museum, specifically a talker droid or Autonomous Translator Module Mark II. Droids of this type were not special in their own right, as most of them were scrapped long ago, but this one spoke Trawak, a reclusive language that had never before been cracked by linguists and had long died out. So the 4th Division sent their pathfinders to Coruscant, accompanied by Calrissian aboard the Falcon, and they were able to retrieve the droid, suffering only one casualty. Sending the codes was another challenge all unto itself, as the 4th Division was being hunted by Commander Zara and her formidable ship, the Tarkin's Will, and this is exactly who Starlight Squadron ran into while carrying the codes. They attempted to contact the 6th Division and give them the codes, but found only the debris floating around the planet and realized it was a trap. It was too late to retreat, and a skirmish broke out between the squadron and the Star Destroyer. But Starlight Squadron, under the command of their ace Sharon Bay, was able to disable the ship's tractor beam and escape, albeit without their commander, whose ship was shot down. After this, Starlight Squadron went to Abdalis under the command of Luke Skywalker to deliver the code to the 11th Division, which included Mon Mothma and Admiral Ackbar. But upon arriving, they found them grounded and being heavily bombarded by the Star Destroyer Ultima II under Admiral Calexo, who was part of Zara's group hunting the rebels in this sector. But despite their nearly hopeless situation, the 11th was able to escape with a cunning plan transmitted to Starlight Squadron, which involved the volcano over which the Ultima II was situated being made to erupt, and within a few passes they were able to destroy the ship, allowing the 11th to escape. With the Ultima II destroyed and the Tarkin's Will disabled, the rebels were able to have a little more freedom of movement to send the codes. With that, the entirety of the Rebel Alliance was given orders to assemble at Sullust. The other operation being conducted, that being Yellow Moon, was to be a distraction that would grab the Empire's attention away from Sullust and to the Corva sector. It was led by General Organa, who proposed the plan. She initially faced criticism as the loss of life she'd incur by using lightly encrypted codes would be high and new recruits would be killed. But Organa reminded them of Alderaan and the lives that were at stake should the new Death Star be allowed to be completed. Only after this, Mon Mothma gave the green light. The plan called for a series of missions to be conducted on Bastille, Sesid and Jeresh. During each, they would meet the resistance leaders on each world and place hypertransceivers that would generate transmission activity calling the rebels for a rendezvous over the planet Galan to conduct an unspecified operation. The plan worked, and the rebels were able to successfully distract the Empire in all 3 of the missions, but they were also being hunted by Captain Kione and her Imperial-class Star Destroyer Shield Maiden the whole way, and were nearly caught several times. Upon arriving over Galan, Leia ordered the ships to disperse. She knew Kione would not be far behind. She arrived soon, capturing Leia's ship and taking her and her crew aboard the Shield Maiden to interrogate them. But their stay was brief, thanks to the sacrifice of some of the members of Leia's team. They could disable the ship, kill Kione, and escape aboard an Imperial shuttle before the Shield Maiden exploded and another Star Destroyer came to the scene. With both operations conducted successfully, all they had to do now was wait for the fleet to be fully massed. This gave time for General Organa, Skywalker, and Calrissian to find the location of their captured friend Han Solo. Calrissian had discovered that he'd been taken to Tatooine and was put on display in the Palace of Jabba of the Hutt clan. They were able to rescue Solo, but not before they were captured after a brief hiccup that almost got them executed in a sarlacc pit outside the palace. Luke and Calrissian had anticipated this and were able to break free, destroying Jabba's sail barge and killing the crime lord himself before escaping. With the rebel fleet nearly gathered, all of the leaders of the fleet were convened to discuss the plan of attack. The Imperial station itself was still under construction, but was protected by a deflector shield generator that was based on the forest moon of Endor, which the station itself was situated next to. The incomplete Death Star was already a tempting target, but the rebels also learned that the Emperor himself was there to oversee its final construction, meaning this was an opportunity that could not be missed. The plan called for the rebels to divide their forces. General Solo was to command the ground forces that would infiltrate the moon using the Lambda-class shuttle Leia stole from the Shield Maiden, the Tadirium, and destroy the deflector shield generator. The ground forces consisted of many elite scouts from the entirety of the fleet, as well as the crew of the Millennium Falcon, that being Organa, Chewbacca, and Skywalker. The next day, once they had destroyed the base at the specified time, the fleet would follow. The fleet was itself commanded by Supreme Commander Admiral Ackbar, and consisted of at least 4 MC-80A Home 1 type heavy cruisers, including Ackbar's command ship, the Home 1, 5 MC-80 Liberty type heavy star cruisers, 16 GR-75 medium transports, 4 Brahatok class gunships, 8 CR-90 corvettes, 10 EF-76 Nebulon B escort frigates, 4 DP-20 frigates, a few X-4 gunships, and a YT-2400 light freighter. Attached to them were BTL A4Y wings, ASF O1B wings, RZ-1A wings, UT-60D U wings, and T-65B X wings, all divided into Red Squadron, Blue Squadron, Grey Squadron, Green Squadron, Riot Squadron, Corona Squadron, Blade Squadron, and Gold Squadron. The latter was to be put under the command of General Calrissian aboard the Millennium Falcon, and they were given the task to take out the Death Star itself while the fleet covered them. Come morning, the strike team reached the forest moon and was given clearance to pass into Endor by the Executor, as Vader sensed Luke aboard the ship. Luke in turn feared he had endangered the mission by coming, as he sensed Vader too, but he was calmed by Solo. They were able to infiltrate the moon without much of a problem, but almost immediately were forced to fight the Imperials in a speeder chase, and then Solo's group was captured by the natives, known as Ewoks, and taken to Bright Tree Village. Initially, the Ewoks were adamant on eating Solo and his friends, but their fondness for C-3PO, who they called a golden deity, and a little forced demonstration by Skywalker convinced them to let them go. The rebels explained to the Ewoks why they were there, and that the Imperials, whom the Ewoks had been fighting all this time, were their enemies too. This led to the Ewoks convening a council of war, in which they agreed that this was the time to strike, and they would do so unanimously with the support of all the tribes. Before dawn broke, they left into the forest. Skywalker too left during the night, knowing he had to face his father. He allowed himself to be captured, and come morning was brought to the Death Star by Vader. Meanwhile, Solo's team departed the village with their gear and the supplies given to them by the Ewoks, and linked up with their remaining squads, making their way to the generator. The Ewoks led them to the rear entrance, which was lightly defended, and after one of the Ewoks stole a speed bike and diverted the guards' attention, the rebels stormed the base and started setting explosives to destroy the installation and disable the shield defending the Death Star. Unfortunately for them, they were then set upon by the stormtroopers of the 501st Legion and forced to surrender. Just as this was happening, the rebel fleet entered the system, and Gold Squadron led the way, with all wings reporting in. Calrissian commenced his attack, but immediately something was awry. His co-pilot, Nien Numb, detected their signals were being jammed. Calrissian immediately knew what was going on, and called his squad to retreat, and signaled Home 1 to fall back, knowing the shield of the Death Star was still intact. At that point, the rebels detected ships coming in behind them. It was a trap. The rebels were pinned in with the Death Star on one side and the massive Imperial fleet that had hidden behind the moon, led by Death Squadron's flagship, the Executor, accompanied by 30 Star Destroyers, as well as several interdictor ships who activated their gravity wells upon arriving to close hyperspace for the rebels. The battle began with the Imperial fleet launching its TIE fighter and bomber squadrons, which swarmed the rebel fleet. All of the rebel squadrons were ordered to protect the main ships, and a fierce duel broke out among them, with the rebels trying to establish a defensive position and drive the TIE squadrons out of their formation. Calrissian ordered all of the fighter squadrons to follow him towards the Executor to draw the Imperial TIEs away from the fleet. The maneuver worked, as the TIEs and the rebels smashed into one another, and a great battle took place between the fleet lines, eventually leaking over the Imperial side. The Imperial fleet, despite its massive advantage in firepower, would not engage, which puzzled the rebels. The Imperials were eager to get into the fight, but were under orders from the Emperor to just hold the rebel fleet in the system. It would soon become apparent to both sides as the disk of the Death Star shone green and its beams connected to blast the rebel ship Liberty into pieces that the monstrous station was not incomplete at all. Despite its appearance, it was very much fully operational. As both sides were shocked by this, Ackbar was prepared to sound the retreat, but Calrissian knew that very few would be able to get out of the system alive, and hoped that, given more time, Solo would have the shield down, not knowing that they had been captured. Calrissian recommended that all ships close in on the Imperial fleet and engage them at point-blank range, reasoning to Ackbar that they'd last longer fighting the fleet than against the Death Star. Not long after, the Death Star fired again and destroyed the Nautilian, and with no time left to spare, Ackbar agreed with Calrissian, and the whole of the Rebel Alliance fleet charged. The Imperials were taken aback by this, not expecting the rebels to be foolish enough to engage their superior battle line. But in what was basically close quarters melee on the scale of space, the rebel starfighters were the best. These were not fighters of the same caliber which Vader had easily defeated on Vrogas Vas, nor the ones they had run out of Makotar and Hoth. They had been there for all of that and were now all aces. Ackbar aided them in their efforts with his later iconic slash tactic, which was the concentration of their fire at single points where the enemy had no chance to repel them. And all the Death Star could do was watch while one by one the Star Destroyers fell. Blade Squadron took out Vader's own Devastator, followed by others taking out the Pride of Talandia, which severely weakened the Imperial communications, and then Vermont and Harbinger fell. But this was coming at the cost of many of the rebel starfighters who were giving their all to win what they knew would be the deciding battle. Events were transpiring on the surface. As the battle was playing out above, the Ewoks entered the fray and freed Solo's strike team. During the close quarters fighting, the rebels managed to take over an Imperial AT-ST and destroyed the shield installation. Now, with the shield down, Ackbar ordered an attack on the Death Star. Calrissian broke off from the fight, ordering Gold Squadron and Red Squadrons to converge on him. With Antilles leading the way, they entered the Death Star, being hotly pursued. To buy them time and get the Imperials off their tail, Ackbar ordered all ships to concentrate their fire on the Executor, knowing that it was the linchpin. The Executor was hammered heavily, but dealt heavy damage in return. During the fight, its bridge's deflector shields were destroyed, and an A-Wing fighter of Arvel Kinid rammed into the bridge, killing the Executor's commander Piet and all of the command crew. Admiral Sloane's Vigilance moved in to cover the Executor's flank and protect it, knowing that the rebels would now destroy the Executor. But by then, it was already too late, as with the loss of the bridge crew, power could not be controlled, and the ship went down, being pulled by the gravity well generated by the Death Star, which it crashed into. Admiral Sloane then took command and ordered the fleet to form up on the Vigilance to continue the fight, as the chain of command was broken. No orders from the Emperor or anyone aboard the Death Star were being relayed for some time, and no orders were coming. The Emperor himself was already dead, having been killed by Darth Vader as Palpatine tried to kill Luke, who wouldn't turn to the dark side as he had hoped. Vader himself was severely wounded doing this, and Luke took him to the docking bay to escape. The station shook violently from the fight erupting in its interior between the rebels and Imperials in their race for the reactor. Skywalker managed to get off with Vader in time as Antilles and Calrissian found and destroyed the reactor, causing the chain reaction that started blowing up the Death Star. Seeing this, Ackbar ordered the fleet to pull back as the station, the symbol of Imperial dominance, exploded before them. Admiral Sloane knew that the situation was now hopeless, as the proper chain of command was impossible to maintain. She ordered a retreat to the Anaj system, to the commanders that still listened to her. The Battle of Endor had turned the entirety of the galaxy on its head overnight. The loss of the second Death Star, their best ships and crews, and Lord Vader was bad enough, but the loss of Emperor Palpatine was more than the Empire could handle, having been built in such a way that it depended on him. With the revelation of his death, many systems rose up in revolt, such as on Coruscant, the Empire's capital, where crowds celebrated his demise, pulling down statues and overwhelming the stormtrooper patrols before more arrived, and a full-out revolt began that would last for the rest of the war. While technically, control should have been given to Mas Amedda, the Grand Vizier, there was never a formal succession determined by Palpatine, and as such, the Empire splintered into sub-factions, led by governors, admirals, and moffs. Many of them tried to hide the news of the Emperor's demise, even making it illegal to spread the rumors. The rebels, meanwhile, couldn't have asked for a better situation, as no one seriously threatened the rebellion, now being stylized as the New Republic. This, coupled with valuable information gained from storming an Imperial base hidden upon the other side of the Endor moon, led to the Republic now being able to go on the offensive once again, and this time they would not lose their momentum. Unfortunately for them, dead Palpatine had one last card to play. As the rebels scrambled to press their advantage, and the Imperial factions likewise scrambled for control, Sentinel messenger droids were sent from Coruscant to a select few within the Empire with the simple message: Operation Cinder is to begin at once. Palpatine likened the Empire to a game within the galaxy known as Shad-Tej, in which the players have various pieces on a board, and their goal is to take their opponents and defend their most important piece, the Imperator. As the Empire had failed to defend him, it did not deserve to exist. This became the base of the contingency plan to wipe out the galaxy and flee with a small remnant to the unknown regions and build anew. Operation Cinder was the beginning of this contingency plan. This operation entailed the complete destruction of a select number of worlds. This would be accomplished with specially made satellites that would be arrayed over the target planet and activated, which would then cause the planet to undergo cataclysmic climate changes that would devastate the surface of the planet. The first planet to endure this horrific ordeal was Vados, a pro-Imperial world. No one was safe from the contingency plan, and the population was completely wiped out. To show the galaxy that the rebellion can't defend them, this was followed by others, such as Necronis, Burnin Khorne, and Synthrodis, all of them made a barren wasteland. But all was not lost, as those who opposed Palpatine in life now did so after his death. The Republic was on the move, having obtained bits of information for the plan on the Endor base, and much from defectors who had become disillusioned with the Empire over the operation, such as Iden Versio of the infamous Inferno Squad, and Erika Quell from the 204th Imperial Fighter Wing. With their help, the Republic could now fully deduce what Operation Cinder was. The next target was Naboo, and they sent Lando Calrissian and Iden to confirm this. They arrived just in time, as a battle was being fought in Theed, the capital of Naboo. Leia Organa led the defenders, and Lando and Iden's arrival turned the tide, as they could not only knock out the Imperial satellite arrays, but land below and activate Theed's Iron Pulse defenses, which neutralized the Imperial weapons. All of the Imperials were taken prisoner or fled. The New Republic, spearheaded by elite units such as Iden's reformed Inferno Squad, Namir's Twilight Company, and the newly formed Alphabet Squadron under Erika Quell, then set about finding each of the task forces that were part of Operation Cinder, and were mostly successful, saving untold millions of lives. The Alphabet Squadron's hunt for Shadow Wing was one of the most prominent of these missions. The 204th Imperial Fighter Wing, codenamed Shadow Wing, was one of the earliest starfighter wings within the Empire, and its longevity led to it being a highly trained and veteran unit, having conducted security as well as anti-pirate operations before the war. It was known for its merciless brutality in combat and strict adherence to the Empire and the Emperor's will, courtesy of their part in the Ordina massacre, where they earned their nickname as they were associated with the phrase, "Where shadow falls, all things die." During the war, they were assigned to hunt rebel squadrons, and in this they were highly proficient. It is no surprise then that the Shadow Wing, under the command of Colonel Shakara Nares, was visited by one of the Sentinel droids with the order to begin Operation Cinder. Indeed, they were the ones responsible for the destruction of Necronis, which led to Quell's defection. As they were so dangerous, the Republic gave the job of hunting them to General Hera Syndulla's Barma battle group and the newly formed Alphabet Squadron, made up of veteran pilots from within the rebellion, each having a history of fighting Shadow Wing. This included the Endor veteran B-Wing bomber pilot Chasna Chaddick, another Endor veteran, the Y-Wing bomber pilot Nath Tencent, the mysterious but loyal U-Wing support fighter Kairos, and an A-Wing fighter pilot Will Lark. As Quell was the commander, she flew an X-Wing fighter. Initially, the Alphabet Squadron worked poorly together, but with increased trust, they gained success at Argai Minor and the Battle of Haldane. Shadow Wing had made Pandem Nai, a gas mining planet situated in the Outer Rim, its operational base to conduct anti-rebel raids within the system, as well as wait to receive orders once Imperial authority was centralized, as Nares deemed it an important supply point, and made a base on Orbital 1, a mining station within the orbit of the planet. Shadow Wing had all of its 6 TIE Fighter squadrons docked on the base or the mining platforms around the planet, and at their main base, the Imperial 1-class Star Destroyer, the Pursuer. These were well protected from attack, as not only was there a minefield in front of the base, but the gas around the planet served as a natural repellent, as capital ships could not fire into it without igniting the gas. This left the only option to their enemies being to try and take them on with starfighters, and no one could hope to beat them at their best advantage. Despite this sufficient amount of firepower and defences, they would find themselves on the back foot, as Nares had intentionally destroyed all of the signal stations on the planets around Pandem Nai to conceal their location, which worked to some degree. Still, it was a double-edged sword, as now, without any warning, Syndulla's force was approaching Pandem Nai. They had tracked Shadow Wing to Pandem Nai through the information gathered by their Republic intelligence agent Cairn Aiden, who deduced the location of Shadow Wing. Syndulla had the numbers to combat the Shadow Wing, but the defences still posed an obstacle. However, Quell already knew the strategy of their former unit. Their entire plan relied on their TIE squadrons to dominate orbit, so Quell's plan was simple: trap them in their base, infiltrate the base of Orbit 1 to bar the Imperial pilots from flying, and afterwards send in the rest of the Republic squadrons. Syndulla's force, while mostly maintaining a defensive posture outside Pandem Nai's orbit, was centered around her flagship, the Lodestar, which was an Acclamator-class assault ship which housed Alphabet, Hail, Meteor and Vanguard squadrons. Lodestar was supplemented with 12 cruisers and corvettes. Quell led the way, navigating the minefield and appearing right within Nares's defences. Her squadron attacked the hangars, sealing all of them and trapping the Imperials inside. But there was still a sufficient number of pilots that launched from the platforms after getting the alert that Orbit 1 was under attack. So Quell remained in the airfight along with most of the ships, as Kairos' U-Wing deployed the assault squad on Orbit 1, tying up a large number of the otherwise badly needed Imperial pilots on the base to combat them. Until this point, the plan had gone without a hitch, but as the old saying goes, no plan survives contact with the enemy. Nares, in a bid to free her fighters, ordered the debris to be blown up, and it worked as intended, but this also served to trigger the gas pods around the station to explode, in a chain reaction that led to the base losing its orbit and slowly descending towards Pandem Nai before breaking off in heaps and crashing towards the planet. Having participated in the destruction of Necronis, Quell could not let any more innocent people die, so she immediately ordered all squadrons to abandon the planet, saying it was now a rescue operation. This allowed the Shadow Wing to flee the system, but Quell's quick thinking still allowed them to avert the terrible destruction of the planet. Still, the defeat at Pandem Nai had severely weakened Shadow Wing, as it had lost many TIE fighters as well as the flagship, the Pursuer, and its leader, Nares. But they were not out of the fight yet, as command was taken over by one of their former members who had returned to his unit. Soren Kais retreated with the remainder of the 204th to rebuild it aboard the Quasar-Fire-class cruiser carrier Airi, continuing with the Operation Cinder directive. The fact that Syndulla was ordered to take her forces into the Cerberon system, which was being slowly fought over by Imperial and Republic forces, allowed Shadow Wing some breathing room. Syndulla's force was to change the balance of power in Cerberon, and she was ordered to attack Troithe, the capital within the system. Troithe was an ecumenopolis similar to Coruscant, a single city encompassing the whole world. Taking this planet was vital, as it served as a highway between the core worlds. Initially, it was planned as a siege operation, but Syndulla was convinced otherwise by Aiden and Quell. Their plan would incur a risk of high casualties, but if it would succeed, it would bait the 204th to come out of hiding. First, Chas and Quell led separate squadrons to clear out the stations within the debris fields of any enemies, which was done with relative ease, leading to the Republic troops making their landing with air superiority, taking the planet's spaceport within the same day. They advanced immediately towards the city's central capital district, but it was risky as it exposed their flanks to being cut off. Possible reinforcement would have difficulty reaching them, as the city's aerial defenses remained intact. The next day they began their attack. The elite 61st Mobile Infantry led the ground assault, assisted by Syndulla's squadrons from above, pushing through district after district, taking losses, having to clear out buildings and destroy whole buildings. Will Lark had to destroy an entire skyscraper with 15 stories of stormtroopers inside. Losses were mounting for both sides as they threw everything into the fight, with the Imperials using 80-80s and 80-ACTs. But the Republic was gaining ground, as the Imperials couldn't focus on either air or ground groups without the other one undermining their position, leading to fallback after fallback. Upon reaching the Thanahouse district, which held some developed lakes, they encountered an Imperial trap as 6 Kraken-class deep lurkers sprung from beneath the waters, stunning the advance and destroying equipment and infantry. However, the trap failed, as Chas and Tencent were able to destroy the deep lurkers with guided bombs. Chas and Kairos were sent ahead, as they regrouped and mapped the route, leading the subsequent advance to quickly steamroll the enemy defences until they were all within the central area, where aerial combat started, as the Imperials threw all of their available ships into the fight. However, the experience of the Republic pilots won the day, and after repeated assaults, their ground forces took down the planetary shield and captured the capital district, with the rest of the Imperials fleeing or dead, and Governor Hastamore as one of the casualties. With the district secure, the Barma group set about consolidating the city and preparing the trap for Shadow Wing, sending the 61st's commandos into the asteroid belt. But while they held the city center, they still didn't control the whole planet, which had many Imperial sympathizers. This led to a protracted guerrilla campaign on the planet, and Syndulla had to deal with the Imperials with her already depleted force, as they incurred many casualties over the past few weeks, including Kairos, who was severely wounded. During this fight, Aiden was captured while on the ground. As Syndulla had to depart the system to assist in another campaign, Quell was left in charge of the Barma group. She led the group to rescue Aiden from the Imperial insurgents, but by the time Quell returned to her post, the Shadow Wing had made their move. Quell's plan seemed to work, as they managed to lure Shadow Wing out of hiding. But Colonel Kais was not tricked into trying to take the planet back. Instead, he tried to find the fatal flaw of the forces of the Republic, similar to what Quell did on Pandem Nai. Shadow Wing was no longer the depleted force which fled Pandem Nai. Their squadrons were filled out once more, and supplemented with a Quasar-Fire-class cruiser, Airi, and an Imperial II-class Star Destroyer, the Edict, as well as their complement of stormtroopers and naval forces. His goal was to destroy the Lodestar, carrying most of the Republic squadrons, and finish off the Barma group before leaving the system. His plan called for a distraction, and Airi would play the role of bait. As that ship previously engaged in several atrocities, Airi was a tempting target for the Republic forces. Airi appeared above Catadra, a temple nearby in Troithe, with several fighters, with Keyes personally in command, luring as many Republic starfighters as they could to their position. This was mildly successful, as they engaged Meteor Squadron and other craft, including Will Lark's A-Wing. As this fight was going on, the Edict hid with the TIE squadrons in the debris field by jamming the Republic sensors, and proceeded to attack the Lodestar, which they believed was being commanded by Syndulla, but was under the command of Captain Giganivek. With both forces heavily engaged, it was a matter of who would break first, and this would be at Katadra, as the Airi and its fighters finished off the Republic forces, destroying Meteor Squadron, and were about to proceed to aid the Edict, but were disabled by Quell, who used a captured bulk freighter to tow a large piece of debris, which crippled the ship, sending it crashing onto a nearby asteroid along with her freighter, leaving both commanders downed as the fighting continued. Above Troithe, the Republic's situation rapidly deteriorated as the Lodestar and Edict pummeled each other. The Edict gained the upper hand, thanks to its array of guns and the air superiority afforded by the Katadra distraction. Kayes was able to return to the fight, and now conducted the attack with the Lodestar in flames, despite the best efforts of Alphabet Squadron. It broke into pieces and descended onto the planet below, soon followed however by the Edict, which was heavily damaged in the fight, before being knocked out by Troithe's orbital defences. Both ships crashed on the city's shield below. The shields soon cracked under the pressure, and both forces crashed down. Shadow Wing, along with Bomber Group, was confined to Troithe. They both immediately began preparing for battle, knowing they were all trapped on the planet. Kayes contacted the acting Imperial Governor of the planet, Farah Yadiz, who commanded the Imperial guerrillas under the pretense that he had come to liberate Troithe. The Republic forces had been scattered on Troithe and around the system, but the forces on Troithe managed to consolidate under Will Lark and Tencent, and their goal was counter to Kayes', being that they had to halt him on Troithe and await reinforcements. Having done preliminary scouting and scattered fighting in and around the city, both forces soon converged on a mining facility on Troithe located in a gorge known as the Scar of Troithe. It was a mega facility, and the Shadow Wing hoped there would be a freighter among the facility's equipment. The Imperials had arrived first and began preparing to leave as they discovered a bulk freighter. While they were moving their equipment onto the ship, the 61st, along with Will Lark's squadron, attacked the facility. A protracted battle nearly saw the Republic beaten back, but the timely arrival of Syndulla, who had returned with the Vanguard Squadron and the MC-75 Starcruiser Temperance, changed the tide of the battle. Seeing that there was no time for anything else, Kayes ordered the immediate departure of the freighter and launched a series of missiles towards the city that were recovered from the Edict as a cover from the starfighters, which called off their pursuit, leaving the remnants of Shadow Wing to escape. The demoralized Imperials under Yadiz surrendered with their departure, and the Cerberon campaign was over. The battle was a Pyrrhic victory for both sides, as the Republic captured the Cerberon system, and Shadow Wing returned the blow from Pandem Nai, severely damaging the Republic's forces in their sector. But as was common for the galaxy post-Endor, the Imperials were ultimately on the back foot, as they could not replace their losses effectively. As such, Shadow Wing's role in Operation Cinder was largely over, and by this time, the operation had failed, though the hunt would continue. After a period of consolidation, such as the reconstitution of the Galactic Senate at Chandrila, the New Republic was on the move, launching campaigns into the outlying sectors. Han Solo and Chewbacca left the fleet, hoping to liberate Kashyyyk, but were delayed by several setbacks, eventually being able to liberate the planet near the war's end. The Empire did little in the way of fighting back against these assaults, and almost as soon as the Battle of Endor ended, the Empire's security and stability crumbled in a matter of days. Moffs, governors, generals, and anyone who held a modicum of Imperial authority carved up their own power base within the Empire. Palpatine had set up no direct succession, but legally, command should have fallen to Mas Amedda as the Grand Vizier of the Empire and the ruler of Coruscant. Still, as Coruscant tore itself apart into open rebellion, no eyes turned to him for leadership, as not only was his influence pitiful at best, he could not even control his own world. Instead, as mentioned, the Imperials carved up the sectors, systems, and planets amongst themselves. This was primarily done on the sector scale by the Grand Moffs, as the systems and planets couldn't hope to resist their power. The most notable and successful example of this was the Anode sector under Grand Moff Ubric Adalhard. He and others managed to do that firstly by consolidating his power and downplaying the success of the rebels as mere propaganda, assuring the people that the Emperor was alive and the Empire fully consolidated. But where Adalhard differed was in his goals and what he was willing to do to achieve them. Showing his skill for tactics, he was able to use what resources he had to near completely lock down his sector to the outer galaxy, so much so it became known as the Iron Blockade. Forming a pact with the spice traders of Kijimi, who bolstered his forces and served additionally as contacts to the galactic underworld, he built a seemingly impregnable defense around his sector. Though he was not strong enough to go on the offensive, he had plans of such endeavors in the future, but he and the New Republic were not yet capable of interfering with each other beyond minor skirmishes.
Meanwhile, the likes of the Yomo Council, based at Vadovoy's End, and the Chadorn faction, based on Chadawa, broke away entirely. Still, these usually were dissolved rather quickly, either by annexation to the Republic, as Chadawa was, or by annihilation from pro-Imperial remnants, such as the 204th's destruction of the Yomo. These are some examples of the Imperial remnant that we know of, but not all of them can be accounted for, as in some cases, fleets, squadrons, and even single ships formed their own factions. Two key problems, arguably more detrimental than the aforementioned fragmentation, exacerbated this. First was the fact that the Imperials didn't know who to ally with, as one wrong move could count them as traitors should their newfound ally be deemed as such by a larger or more legitimate faction. We discussed such a case previously. The commander of Shadow Wing, Colonel Shakura Nares, denied joining forces with Colonel Medragast, the commander of the ISD Unyielding and the 108th Wing, in fear of future consequences, and without the support of Unyielding, the Shadow Wing was soon attacked at Pandem Nai by the New Republic, and almost wiped out entirely. The second was resources. The Empire's main strength was its abundance of resources to build and supply its strongest asset, the Imperial Navy. As such, they were built to produce obedience through their firepower and imposing might, and now that entire systems were cut off from one another, their own worlds rebelled against them. They could not attain the resources necessary to maintain such operations, with many captains either scuttling or surrendering their ships to the advancing New Republic, with one notable case as an example being the surrender of 2 of the Empire's 13 Executor-class Star Dreadnoughts to the Republic, simply because they couldn't maintain them. This scenario would be played out on repeat throughout the months following Endor as the Empire fought itself and the Republic mopped up what exhausted forces were left. The Republic had grown so large that they were, by the turn of the year, an unignorable threat to the Empire. The former rebels could now make direct assaults, such as on Nalol and Geonosis, and were campaigning on key planets, steadily gaining ground. But the whittling down of the Empire had led others to consolidate into powerful factions. The largest of these, which held the most legitimacy after Endor, was the one under Admiral Ray Sloane. Sloane was by all means a competent officer and tactician, being highly decorated, and during the current war she was the highest commanding officer left after the destruction of the Executor during the Battle of Endor, and ordered a retreat after seeing the battle had swung in the rebels' favour, saving what was left of them. She then was able to gather up a large enough force to be a top contender among the remnants, with the Executor-class dreadnought the Ravager as her flagship, and a plethora of worlds behind her. Now, with the threat presented by the New Republic, she decided to arrange a meeting between a select few Imperial remnant leaders that had emerged from the fragmentation as powerful contenders on the planet Akiva to discuss the future of the Empire. However, not all was as it seemed. Before making it to Akiva's capital, where the delegates were awaiting, Sloane encountered famous rebel hero Captain Wedge Antilles, who was scouting the Akiva system and took him prisoner. Still, he temporarily escaped and sent a distress signal. Her time on Akiva filled her with apprehension, as the reliance on the native Imperial government was necessary not to bring attention from the New Republic, but at the same time, meant that they had to rely on this puppet government for security matters. The meeting went poorly, as they were more content to argue with one another than to come to an agreement on what should become of the Empire. This did not last long, however, as soon they heard a crowd gathering outside the building in protest. Sloane was right in worrying that someone had leaked the meeting, and this protest soon turned into an open rebellion. She just barely managed to escape, as not only had Republic Special Forces destroyed Imperial shuttles, but also, having confirmed their presence, a fleet under Admiral Ackbar arrived over Akiva and destroyed 2 of the 3 ISDs, with Sloane escaping on the 3rd. Akiva was thus captured by the Republic, and Sloane fled to the Vulpinus Nebula where the rest of the fleet was. It was now that the mysterious player would emerge, Admiral Gallius Rax. Sloane suspected he had a hand in the Akiva debacle, but Rax was, like Sloane, a decorated veteran who spent his time in personal service to the Emperor. Rax claimed that it was thanks to his efforts that they had gotten this strong, and it was he who made the Akiva summit possible. She rightly demanded to know why he had leaked the information to the Republic, and he told her that it was a necessity to get rid of their rivals, which it had done, but also to serve as a test for her, as he told her he'd need her for the restoration of the Empire, and asked her to stay as the face of his movement. She agreed, as not only was this the best option to save the Empire, but also Rax was not someone to cross. She would go with him, but she would never trust him again, and secretly took steps to investigate his involvement and mysterious past within the Empire.
At the start of 5 ABY, things were brought closer in perspective, as several forays were launched into the Anode sector to break Adelhardt's blockade. They had little success, but fortunes began to turn with Calrissian's involvement, as he led the newly formed native rebel cell called the Uprising to harass Adelhardt's remnant, which wore down his ability to hold the sector. Several events would transpire, including 2 of Adelhardt's closest allies betraying him, one brought about by Rax, as he no longer served his purpose of being a distraction, as he had become a nuisance that other Imperials were rallying behind. However, much to the surprise of all parties involved, he survived and regained control of his forces. Though one could say his mind did not survive intact, as he no longer wished to preserve the Empire, but rather engulf the galaxy in the raging inferno that was his wrath. This was felt keenly by the New Republic, as he chased down Calrissian with a vengeance, and launched several reprisal operations into the New Republic that targeted several high-ranking officers, including Mon Mothma and Leia, the most notable being the assassination of the Republic's spymaster, Caldeberens.
At the same time, not only had several attacks on Naboo been repulsed, but the Republic now dealt a crippling blow to the Imperials with the capture of Kuat. This was arguably more devastating than Endor, as it held the Kuat Drive shipyards, responsible for not only nearly every Star Destroyer the Empire had made, but for the maintenance and construction of nearly all the capital ships in the galaxy. The capture of Kuat gave the Republic an overwhelming edge, as they could now refit and repair all of the ISDs they captured, as well as construct ships of their own. Admiral Sloane knew that if things continued at this rate, the Empire would be done, so she needed to come to terms with the New Republic, and hopefully in the future, the Empire could be consolidated to challenge the Republic. Rax agreed, and she asked for peace talks, which Mon Mothma and Leia Organa accepted. After a month of preparation, Sloane set out to the Republic capital of Chandrila with an escort. The planned day for the negotiations was to coincide with Liberation Day, which was arranged for the newly freed prisoners of Ashmead's Lock, a prison near Kashyyyk that was liberated during the campaign there. The New Republic was to hold the celebration in view of the galaxy, in hopes of enticing other worlds to join them, as they saw the New Republic freeing the galaxy and making the Empire come to terms. But as had been done on Akiva, all was not as it seemed, as Gallius Rax was plotting yet again. At the height of the celebration, the prisoners pulled out guns and attacked everyone within range, killing many Republican delegates and officers. The prisoners were meant to be freed, as Rax intended. He had placed biochips in them for just this reason. Sloane had known that Rax was planning something to coincide with this meeting, but not this,
knowing she would either be killed or survive and be blamed for this, so she took what guards she had and fled the planet. Her aide, Adea Wright, attempted to assassinate her, working under Rax, but failed. Sloane was now disgusted beyond belief, as in her mind, Rax's tactics mirrored the rebels she so hated. She swore to take out the infection that was destroying her empire. While the assassination attempt on Chandrila certainly put a terrible stain on the Empire, as they could no longer be trusted, it also hurt the Republic as well. The event had been broadcasted through the galaxy via the Holonet, and the worlds that thought about joining the Republic were now reluctant to do so. Likewise, the worlds that were with the Republic now held doubts as to the security they could provide, as many of them had just lost their senators and delegates during the event. Mon Mothma was wounded during the incident, but quickly tried to repair the damage caused. She was able to maintain control over what systems the Republic had, but needed something to counter the sour taste left in the wake of the massacre. This came in the form of the conclusion of the Kashyyyk campaign, as the planet was finally liberated. It still had Imperial holdouts, but by and large the planet was now secure, and the major space highway it controlled was now in Republic hands, locking the Empire in the Inner Rim, with the Republic looking now for a decisive blow. The Imperials had also been busy in the months following the attack on Chandrila. They were now consolidated under the newly ascendant Councillor of the Empire, Gallius Rax, who had seen fit now to come out of hiding, blaming the Chandrila incident on Sloane. Sloane, meanwhile, had spent her time continuing her hunt for information regarding Rax, joined by a rebel Brenton Wexley. The latter was one of the prisoners of Ashmead's Lock, and was forced to participate in the Chandrila incident by Rax's chip, which made him seek revenge on the Councillor. The pair interrogated many people. Having discovered the horrifying truth behind the facade, they rushed to stop him after hearing that he was on a planet in the Inner Rim. But they weren't the only ones heading to that planet, as Rax had ordered most of the fleet there. We are unsure of the details, as it is speculated that part of his fleet was away, which we shall explain later. The build-up was eventually discovered by Republic spies, who sent notice to their commanders. After deliberation, the new Republic ordered Supreme Fleet Admiral Ackbar to take all available forces and engage the Imperials above the desert planet of Jakku. The Imperials, having been on Jakku for over a month, had established bases and a weapons facility on the planet to serve the garrison troops as well as to supply the massive fleet. The Imperial fleet consisted of hundreds of Class 1 and 2 ISDs, some interdictors, and an array of other vessels. These were support vessels to the Imperial's largest ship, the Executor-class dreadnought Ravager. The Imperial fleet was complemented by thousands of starfighters, including what remained of the infamous Shadow Wing. These were split into 3 battle groups. The first was under the command of Grand Moff Rand, and was assigned to command the forces in the atmosphere, where the majority of the fight was to occur. And on the ground, defending several bases, was General Hodnar Borum. The third was a ground support group, though we don't know if it had a commander or was subordinate to Rax. The New Republic forces were a representation of their successes in the galaxy. The majority of their capital ships consisted of Mon Cala Home 1 and Liberty-type cruisers, including Ackbar's flagship, the Home 1, a mixture of medium ships that included Nebulon Bs, CR-90s, GR-75s, and an array of other vessels, including retrofitted Imperial ships, or ships native to systems that had joined the Republic. We do not hear any mention of captured Imperial ISDs, other than Syndulla's Deliverance participating in the battle, so it is likely that most of them did not participate. What we do know, however, is that there were 3 Starhawk-class battleships. These were new inventions of the Republic, built from captured Imperial ships, and were formidable opponents, as the Imperials tried desperately, but failed, to stop their development. Their deployment would be the main danger to the Imperials. The Imperials were in formation and ready to receive the Republic. By the time Ackbar's forces arrived over Jakku, the Star Destroyers formed a defensive perimeter around the Ravager. The Republic, having assessed the situation, split into their respective groups, with Admiral Ackbar and Commodore Agate leading the main group in the space battle. At the same time, Lieutenant General Broxley and General Tybin commanded the ground forces. Both sides began the battle by launching their fighter wings into the fray. This was standard procedure for both sides, but the last year changed everything, as the Empire no longer held numerical and skill advantage. Many pilots had perished or deserted during and after Endor, and it showed. The veteran Republic fighters now pushed the TIE wings hard toward their own ships. Had the latter been supported by their ISDs, the battle between the fighters might have been different, but Rax ordered his capital ships to the Ravager, knowing its survival determined the outcome of the battle. With the TIEs pushed back, bigger ships of the Republic advanced, and the main battle lines exchanged fire. This went on for a while. Despite the Republic's numerical superiority, they could not break through the Imperial line. The Imperials now let the Ravager loose. The ISDs would make temporary gaps in the line to allow the Ravager to release its overwhelming firepower on single ships, taking them out before the line was closed again. Meanwhile, Syndulla had begun supporting the landing of ground forces as they had tied down the fleet. The Republic began advancing steadily, but it was a hard battle as the Imperials knew this was an all-or-nothing fight and resorted to suicide tactics, which caused heavy casualties on both sides. The situation was still the same for a while, as the Republic tried multiple times to break into the formation with various strategies, though none of these worked. The Imperials were taking casualties in their ships as well, as the rebels had specially designated boarding teams, which consisted of ex-Imperial Navy personnel, to assist them. The stalemate would break when the ISD Punishment, commanded by Captain Groff, left the formation and set a collision course for the Starhawk ship, the Amity. We don't know if it was sheer panic, or perhaps a plan to take out all the Starhawks, but whatever the case, once it hit the Amity, both vessels were destroyed, with another Starhawk, the Concorde, being damaged. Commodore Agate, who captained the Concorde, immediately took advantage of the hole left by the Punishment, and charged the Ravager with the urging of Admiral Ackbar. This contest of firepower disabled the Concorde, as Ravager tried to destroy the ship, but Agate never planned to beat it at its best game. As the ship descended past the Ravager, the Concorde latched onto the Ravager with its powerful tractor beam, just as the Republic fighter wings were ordered to target the Ravager's engines. The Ravager didn't need them to stay afloat, so it didn't prioritize defending them. With its engines gone, the Ravager could do nothing as Concorde dragged it towards the planet below, and as it descended, the Imperials were put into disarray. The formation was broken, and the battle spilled onto the planet. Here, the Imperial vessels attempted to re-establish a line, but failed. The battle was well and truly over, and the Republic had won.
Or had it? Adelhard's small fleet of ships arrived just outside the boundaries of the battle. Consisting mostly of the Spice Runner ships, it nevertheless formed a significant threat, one that neither side was now sure was their enemy. The Republic had sent a sizable force, made up of allies within the underworld, to deal with Adelhard, or at the very least hold him up while they dealt with Gallius. But Adelhard surprised them all. He learned of Rax's build-up, and as things stood now, he was poised to strike and deal a devastating blow to both sides in the apex of his career. But once again, this tactical move would be undone thanks to a betrayal within. The Spice Runners, now afraid their goals no longer aligned with their allies, opened fire upon his ship, the Scepter, destroying it and the Grand Moff. They then fled into space, leaving the outcome of the battle unaltered. While the destruction of the Ravager certainly was the apex of the climax of the space battle, something more important was happening on the surface below in a secret observatory on the planet. The now freed Brenton and Sloane, who had been captured by Rax, were now joined by Nora Wexley and her son's robot, Mr. Bones, and headed towards this observatory to stop Rax from completing Palpatine's final plan. Rax was the prosecutor of Palpatine's contingency plan. Palpatine had groomed him to execute this plan, which included Operation Cinder as its onset, and was to come to a head here at Jakku. The plan Rax had followed to a T had a goal of the complete and utter destruction of the forces of both the Republic and the Empire, hence his constant schemes, which never let the Empire reunite or stop the war with the Republic. This was the final step of the plan,
as on Jakku there was a borehole that, once filled with the Sith artifacts brought there, would cause the planet to explode, killing everyone on and above the planet. They managed to stop him just as he was almost done executing the plan, gunning him down. Before dying, he passed on his plan to Sloane, telling her to take his ship, the Imperialis, and escape to a set of coordinates in the unknown regions, where they would rebuild the Empire. She and the others sealed the borehole and separated. Sloane did just as Rax said, taking the hidden portion of the fleet to the unknown regions. The Battle of Jakku was over. For another few months, as Imperial holdouts refused to surrender, but with the fleet gone and the death of Gallius Rax, there was no more united opposition to the Republic. In the wake of this, Mas Amedda was now effectively in charge of what remained, and signed a peace treaty on Chandrila known as the Galactic Concordance, which saw the Empire officially disbanded. Some Imperial remnants remained, but they were deemed too weak. The new Republic brought peace to the galaxy for now, and the Galactic Civil War was over. For now. We're planning more videos on the Star Wars universe. Check out our Legends lore series on the Thrawn campaign, and make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see them. Please consider liking and sharing, as it helps immensely, and don't forget to comment. We'll try to read and respond to every comment, as we want to know what you think about this video and which videos you hope to see in the future. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we'll catch you on the next one.